Welcome to Norse Code, the number one podcast for you Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host producer. My name is James Pagoshnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin can and string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from the Wide Left Substack. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif. Arif, since you're in such a good mood today, I just wanted to ask, how is the whole consensus board thing going for you, just as a discourse today?
Is there discourse?
We're the day after the draft. People are looking at the teams. People are looking inwards,
right,
at how they did, and are they being nice about it today?
I don't know. I haven't really. I just kind of posted the grades and took a walk for 8 hours. So I don't.
Like, my calves are feeling amazing.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
My thumbs have not been doing much moving at all.
Yeah.
You've been able to finish meals in under 20 minutes. Sorry, under 50 minutes.
You're right. I was like, hey,
70 minutes.
Let's not say things we can't take back. No, my life has been hell. It's been awful. So I don't really understand it, because like, if this was kind of a thing that was like slowly ramping up over the years, right, where more and more discourse about the consensus board or whatever, like, you know, presented itself in each successive draft cycle, you could like adjust to it. That would like make sense and be fine. Kind of like how like the running backs value conversation sort of evolved, or, you know, fourth down or whatever, right? And, you know, specifically because it's attached to me, not that I'm the only one doing it. Jack Lichtenstein's doing it. NFL Mock Draft Database is doing it. The Athletic is doing it. Although I will say, the Athletic wasn't doing it until I started doing it for them. And then when I left, they had their own way of doing it. So, but like, there's a bunch of people doing it, but it very much seems like the locus of this conversation surrounds my board, probably because I promote it more than the Athletic promotes theirs, or NFL Mock Draft Database promotes theirs, or Jack Lichtenstein promotes his, right? Also, I'm limited in my perspective. I can only see the things that are directed at me, so I don't actually know what they're dealing with. But that seems to be kind of what's happening. So like, there's a massive escalation in the discourse, and it specifically revolves around like my stuff. And it very much sucks. It sucks so much because, well, for all of the normal reasons that like people yelling at you suck, I got called a pedophile yesterday. Like, what does that why? What? Like, what? How does that? I just added some numbers together, man, and they weren't ages. Like, what are we doing? That's crazy.
Congratulations. I'm not even on any pain medicine at the moment. I cannot compute what just happened.
But I've been called a racist. I've been called not racist enough. I've been called a lot of things just because I published the consensus board. And the thing is, like, I don't really see people getting that upset about like generally people's boards, right? Like yeah, people will like yell at Mel Kiper or Matt Miller or whatever. But like, for the most part, when he says, hey, I think the Colts, you know, made a mistake reaching for this player. I had him as like 70th on the board and they drafted him like 34th or whatever, right? You know, he'll get pushback. Like, what do you know? You don't work for a team, you know, that kind of stuff. But like, I think like the escalation of that discourse, and, you know, he's on TV, so he probably sees a million more things than I do. But like, still, it all seems to be kind of calibrated to the overall amount of engagement he generally gets, right? Whereas that has just been my life for like the past couple of days. And I really appreciate all of the writers who have like been like, hey, this is like where this guy ranks on Arif Hassan's consensus big board. Like that rules. And I'm glad that they like link back to my work and stuff like that. But the side effect of that is that when they tag me, I get all of the fans who don't like that I'm like, hey, you know, the 49ers drafted Deshaun Stribling at like 34. It was 34. And he was like 99th on the consensus board. And then like every 49ers fan who's like really upset about the concept of evaluating a draft is now tagging me and yelling at me because the 49ers did something that seems unwise, right? Like, you know, you don't know for sure, but like certainly it seems like that wasn't, you know, the smartest move. And given the 49ers track record over the past 4 or 5 years, I think it's fair to be kind of a little skeptical of their approach, right? Which we'll talk about that in a second. But I've gotten so much pushback, and I think one of the things that like really bothers me is that people are arguing against opinions I don't have. Like they're against arguments I'm not making, right? Like everyone's like, man, you're so condescending, which like, I just want to be clear. I am extremely condescending. I am so arrogant. Like I get it, but not really about the consensus board. If we're being honest, like you don't know me like that. So when you say I'm being condescending, you're lying, right? Like you could be you could be right, but that it would be about something else, right? I have never said that teams are bad for specifically deviating from the consensus board. I've said a lot of things that could be mistaken for that. I've said like, hey, you should evaluate your process, or when you do this consistently, it's pretty risky, or I don't think that's wise, or the market probably doesn't support that, right? I've also modified opinions that interact with the consensus board, right? Like the Donovan Jackson thing. Last year, right? The Vikings drafted him in the 20s. I already forget, like 24, right? And he was like 36 on the consensus board, which is going to relate to something that just happened in this draft. And I made the argument that the Vikings absolutely should have traded down. They would have had a market to trade down because multiple teams traded down right after the Vikings did, and so on, right? And Lance Zierlein shared, right, that the Houston Texans also had Donovan Jackson. They were ready to turn in the card, right? They had also ranked him that high. And while that doesn't change necessarily the conclusion, right, that maybe the Vikings should have traded down and gotten more value, it does change the nature of the argument, because one of the arguments you could make is that Donovan Jackson would have been available later to the best of our knowledge. Well, that's not true, right? He probably wouldn't have been, right? And we're about to have this conversation about Caleb Banks. And I think that there's some pretty good information out there that would suggest I change my mind about, or change my initial take, I should say, about the Vikings process with Caleb Banks. And we'll talk about that, right? So I don't say that like a team is bad for drafting a player that they've drafted off of consensus or whatever. But I say it raises a lot of questions that they probably should have some means of answering, either implicitly or explicitly. And presents a lot more risk than if you draft by consensus. We also do have evidence, right, that teams that largely draft by consensus are doing a really good job of doing that. My most recent piece, I was like, well, we've done this for individual players. Let's do it for teams. And it's like the teams that have drafted most by consensus are the Ravens, the Eagles, and the Panthers between, like, what was it, 2020 and 2022. And, the Panthers, obviously, they're not like an amazing team, so that doesn't sound like the greatest compliment in the world. But when you look specifically at those 20 to 2022 draft classes, those are some of the best draft classes of the year. They're great draft classes. And of the 72 picks that they made within the first 3 rounds of those drafts, they hit on 40 of them, which is greater than 50%. The hit rate generally is around 40%. And by hit, I mean that player ranks around or better than where they were drafted when you do like contract analysis or player performance analysis or whatever. Whereas if you take a look at the 3 worst teams drafting by consensus, which includes the 49ers, actually, also includes the Patriots, and this is before Drake May because he's drafted in 24, right? And was it one other team? I forget now. And they hit on like 20 of 73 guys or something like that. Like the hit rate was half. And it's like, I'm glad you hit on Brock Purdy, man. That's so cool. But like, you probably wanted to hit on Trey Lance, is my guess, right? Like you spent, the Mr. Irrelevant pick on a player ranked 294. The consensus board does not care if you spend pick 256 or whatever, or I think it was 253 that year, on player ranked 294. It's a wash, right? Good work, and it worked out. They probably care if you draft a player like 2nd or 3rd overall who's ranked like 19th. You probably shouldn't do that. And he's a quarterback, so you probably have to pay a little bit more. But like over the course of those 3 drafts, they had some of the worst draft classes, right? So you can say things like teams are taking a risk. We've got some evidence that this is not a risk that you should consistently be making, and that you need to be very specific and particular in your justification for taking that kind of risk. And it doesn't have to be to me. Like this is not like a report card that you have to sign off on or whatever. You're not turning in a paper to me. But like internally, a team should have a process for evaluating why, they're doing something like that. So people are telling me that I am being condescending towards teams. And it's like, maybe other people are taking my work and doing that. But like, leave me alone then. I didn't do that. That's crazy.
All I am doing is aggregating. I am not...
Yeah, this is just like, I am just providing data. I do a fun thing where I grade drafts based off of it, but I'm not like, and I explain why the grades are the way they are. I'm still conflicted about the Cardinals getting such a negative grade for Jeremiah Love in my grades. And I'm open about that. I say that in the piece. And there are guys that are graded negatively that I liked. I remember I liked the Jalix Hunt pick for the Eagles, even though that was way off consensus. I liked the Traden Stukes pick for the Raiders, even though that was way off consensus. Like, I'll say, like, hey, the consensus says this. I don't know if I agree with it or whatever. But, like, the Cardinals one is interesting because it presents a curious question. The Cardinals signed... they just signed somebody in free agency. My brain is leaking because I'm operating off of somehow even less sleep than normal, and I've been arguing online. Right, so they just signed Tyler Algier, who was like overshadowed by Bijan Robinson with the Falcons, but the 1 year he was the sole back, he was pretty outstanding. And then James Conner, they've retained him, and they've got Trey Benson and Bam Knight, who are pretty good running back threes. I wish the Vikings had a running back three as good as either of them. And then they drafted Jeremiah Love, who is almost certainly more talented than these guys, right? But like the value add that you get at running back here versus any defensive player that they could have drafted there seems like a really poor use of resources. There was some discussion about whether or not they were going to trade down. They took a lot of time on the clock. They eventually clarified that they got the wrong number for him, which is wild, but okay, sure. I kind of don't believe you, but I also don't want to accuse you of lying. It's like one of those, right? But like, the guy who announced the pick, actually, Roy Lopez, you could probably do better than him. He's a good player, but like the upgrade of Jeremiah Love over Tyler Algier versus like trading down and grabbing like a nose tackle with the extra pick that you're getting plus whatever defensive player you're getting, that seems pretty good. Like you could have grabbed Mansour Delane, who apparently was worth the 6th overall or whatever, right? Or, more appropriately, Caleb Downs, right? You compare him with Budda Baker, and oh my God, now you don't have the Kyler Murray of the defense, Adrian Taylor Demerson, as your safety. Speaking, like, that's a tiny safety. Get Caleb Downs. So, like, there are a lot of options available to you that could meet needs. So, like, there's, like, interesting questions that are raised by this process, right? And it's I love having that kind of conversation because then you can kind of tease out all of these other things, right? But like people are just assuming that because I have a rank order of players, not an assumption they make of anybody else's rank order of players, but because I call it consensus, which I will talk about that language too, I'm sure, that I think that teams are just catastrophically stupid for not drafting by consensus, or that every pick that they make that's off consensus is somehow bad. And it's like, I agree that the consensus board was wrong about Jermod McCoy, obviously, right? Like, there's no question about that. And so the Raiders got, unfairly boosted in the consensus board grades because the consensus board did not account for what is clearly a devastating knee injury, right? But like, I have people yelling at me. I've got people making assumptions about the way that I interact with data. I just got done with an argument with this 49ers content creator named Vish, who I didn't really like kind of know what his deal was. But like he just made a bunch of assumptions about the content, accused me of a bunch of stuff without knowing kind of what words he was using. Like he accused it of groupthink. Then he later called it a Ponzi scheme. And it's like, you don't like, you got
wide left is a Ponzi scheme, but the like the board itself is not.
No, right. Yeah, exactly. Perfect. Exactly, James. You nailed it.
This is why we need a ballroom.
God, Jesus. I knew you're going to slip that in there somewhere. But like, I had a lot of problems with the concept of calling it groupthink, which I've now written my piece on the grades, and I have now devoted a section. A lot of the pieces like a repeat from last year because it's just updating the data and validation and stuff like that. But I added a section about like, is this groupthink? And I explain what the social psychological process, like the academic term for groupthink, and mostly I don't have that much of a problem. I have some problem, but not that much of a problem when a word kind of escapes academic containment and takes on new meanings. Like, that's just how words work. But the problem with doing that with the word groupthink is that the word actually loses all meaning when you do that, because then you start applying it to literally any process where a group of people make a decision. And it's like, well, that's almost everything we do. That's like what society like is, right? Like, that there's not really a way to get around that. So if a word means everything, then it also obviously means nothing, right? You know, the syndrome, you know, if everybody's special, no one is. That's true for definitions. You can't use the word groupthink to mean any collective decision-making process or kind of survey of data. Otherwise, polls would be groupthink, right? And that's just not how that works. Like, are we calling the presidential approval rating groupthink? That's nuts. It instead refers specifically to the concept of proactively squashing dissenting opinions and removing data that removes you from a predetermined conclusion, where there's a leadership structure that is not impartial. And it was described in a couple of different contexts. People have used it a lot for the Vietnam War, I think correctly, about the way that the war was organized in a bureaucratic fashion at the bureaucracy level. I think most famously, it was used for the Bay of Pigs. It's when I first learned of this word, that was the example that was taught to me, was that the Bay of Pigs fiasco / invasion, whatever you think is the most important way to talk about that, was, you can see from like the logs, a process of groupthink where people lacked innovation capability. They lacked independence of thought. There was no creativity. The group was being coerced into one strain of thought, primarily through social pressure. So it's an iterative process. When someone comes up with an idea, thought, data, or opinion that has the potential to veer you away from your predetermined outcome, there is a social pressure from your peers and from leadership to move you back towards that groupthink conclusion. And that's not what happens with the NFL draft. There are some elements where opinions might narrow, right? And there might even be some elements where people can be kind of socially pressured into having an opinion. Like, if somebody says, I don't think Caleb Downs is that good, I think he's like the 32nd best player in the draft, a lot of people are going to have feedback on that. And there's going to be a lot of pushback. And that pushback, you could argue, is a form of social pressure. But at the same time, there's no leadership mechanism. There's no real consequence to sticking with, your opinion on Caleb Downs or whatever it is, right? And there's no value setting priority on group cohesiveness, which is like a really important element of groupthink, that at the outset, there is a priority value placed on the concept of group cohesiveness. And that group has to be insulated from others, which obviously doesn't happen. We're all posting our boards online, right? And the thing is, there are a lot of social benefits to diverging from the group, which I think a lot of people ignore. That's what hot takes are. Like, that's the problem with sports media is not that there aren't enough hot takes. I don't know. I shouldn't have to explain that, but like, that's the conclusion of this is groupthink. It's not. I have aggregated a bunch of opinions together. The aggregation of those opinions produce a rank order of players. And that rank order of players has historically proven to be pretty good at figuring out either draft order or player talent or both, right? There are some years where the consensus board has beaten the NFL. 2020 is one of those years, as far as I can remember. 2017, the NFL kicked the consensus board butt, right? But like, for the most part, the NFL beats the consensus board. There are some years where the consensus board beats the NFL. And the fact that it's that close all the time, I think, is really meaningful, despite the fact that it can diverge from the NFL fairly often. So I then propose an alternate kind of model for what this is. I call it the wisdom of the crowds. This was coined by a professor named James Surowiecki, who was on the Pablo Torre podcast recently, because that guy hates prediction markets, which rules. Love you, dude. And he started commenting on my work in like a very Not directly. I don't think he's tweeted directly at me. I think I've been tagged in a tweet he responded to. But he's very seemingly supportive of it, which is really cool because I think there are some differences from this than the model that he proposed. There are 4 essential pillars of what constitutes wisdom of the crowds in his book, where he coined the term. He's the guy who invented that term and put it into public discourse. And it doesn't perfectly match, right? There's not true independence. People confer with each other, right? And so there's that. But like, I think a lot of people hear these buzzwords and they know that the buzzwords have a negative connotation, right? It is bad to engage in groupthink. That's true, right? But the thing that we call groupthink, like we need to be pretty specific about. Or if you call things a Ponzi scheme, like that has a meaning. And the meaning is not compounding error, which is what this guy was trying to get at. There's a whole, the idea of a pyramid scheme entirely exists with a downstream and a con artist and like an intent to deceive, right? Anyway, we have a lot of data that indicates that this is like a pretty valid process, right? And it's not just me validating it. Jason Fitzgerald over the Cap validated it using contract data. Timo Risk over at Pro Football Focus validated it using Pro Football Focus WAR data, wins above replacement. It's pretty good at this stuff. So that's kind of like the discussion I wanted to have. But the thing that's really bothering me is that like this is not a very complicated process, and it's not even that different from most of the processes that we engage in when we do a draft analysis. But it has become the center of discourse for whatever reason, at least from my perspective, which is altered, right? There's like a particular view that we have. But it's very weird. I think that I don't know why it sparked such a big response. I think, well, actually, Mitchell Schwartz has a theory as for like why. Hold on, this is kind of an interesting tweet too. I'll take a look at this in a second. But Mitchell Schwartz has a theory for why it kind of blew up. So I'll get into that because I did retweet that because I think it was actually kind of good. I love this like bit where like players are not afraid of alternate perspectives on the NFL now. Like that's such a cool evolution of media. And Mitchell and Jeff Schwartz have been like a big part of that. So he said he's going to weigh in. One, and so he's talking about it from the perspective of like football people inside front offices. So a few reasons that it has kind of produced this pushback. One, many people in NFL front offices don't care to learn how the board comes to be, aka a lot more qualified people who do this professionally and not casual fans. Two, they're unwilling to listen to historical data of how reaches have fared relative to the consensus board, despite loving their own historical data of physical traits and shying away from outliers. Three, the belief that they are better than media members at scouting and creating draft boards. Four, the belief that the 32 NFL scouting staffs are all the best people in the world at this. If anyone else knew better, they'd be hired. This one's an interesting point because I have had multiple people who have worked in the NFL or who are currently working in the NFL who have contacted me about this discourse and have said stuff like, you know, a lot of these people on draft Twitter, like maybe they don't know everything, but a lot of these people work harder and are smarter and sometimes even more accurate than a lot of the people that I work with in the NFL. And it's like, yeah, kind of. It feels like when draft grades come out, people mythologize scouts in the NFL as if like they have this remarkable genius level ability to determine player talent that is independent and unique from anybody else who's not in the NFL. And the problem with confronting that is that obviously expertise is real. Experience is really important. But also, like, you're the guy that drafted Justin Gilbert. F you, right? Like you're gonna get it wrong. And the idea that, like, they're always, you know, more correct and have so much more knowledge needs to be challenged at some level, especially because people with high levels of expertise in something can learn things from people with low levels of expertise in something. In fact, that's all economists try to do to other fields, and they often are wrong, but there are often a lot of insights that you can get from like an econometric approach to, maybe not epidemiology, that one was a bad example, but like an econometric approach to social sciences like election data, right? Like you can learn things from other fields from people who have less experience with you in the field, so long as both parties are relatively humble about it. right? Which economists often aren't. But yeah, I think the example remains. And a lot of people have innovated a lot of new approaches to taking a look at players and player evaluation. And we know that those approaches have value because the people I was talking to that did that 10 years ago now work for the NFL. Like, it's crazy to think of this as like an insular, expertise-driven, mythologically omniscient powerhouse of knowledge, when the ways that they improve the most are by grabbing outside versions or forms of knowledge and improving their process, right? So it's very weird to me. So that was point 4 from Mitchell Schwartz. He had 6. But also, man, I already lost the tweet. I'm so scatterbrained today. Can't imagine why. Here it is. 5, anecdotal evidence of a team that doesn't use the consensus board, which most teams do in some way use a consensus board. I'll talk about that too. And a fatigue of draft analysis and grading due to teams' picks relative to the consensus board. I myself am pretty fatigued by draft analysis because I feel like we're reaching a sameness of thought, even if it might be more right than the way we used to think. It just becomes boring when it's the same stuff over and over with reaches, trade downs, and positional value. And it's like, that makes sense, right? Like, the correctness of an idea doesn't make the idea more exciting. And if you hear the idea a lot, it can get really boring. And an idea that you're sick of is one you naturally kind of want to push back against, regardless of its validity, right? So like, I think that all, makes sense. But it still shocked me. Like, I know that Grant Cohn asked the 49ers like why they're comfortable reaching against consensus, and John Lynch gave like a very, very football guy answer. It's like, well, we do have a consensus, our consensus. And it's like, all right, man.
Our math is better than everyone else's.
And it's like, there's nobody, I think, from the 2020 draft who's on your roster. Like, are you serious? Colton McKivitz, my bad. But like, that's it. Like, your 5th round pick was the one who survived, right? You drafted Trey Lance. You don't. Do they have 2021 guys on their roster? Diamador Lenore. That's it, right? Like, you don't have any 2021 guys on your roster except, again, a 5th round pick. Your only 2022 guys on your roster are a 6th round pick and a 7th round pick. What are you doing? Your consensus is not very good, it seems like. That kind of arrogance, I think, needs more analysis than any arrogance that people are putting upon my relationship to the consensus board. But yeah, it's caused a lot of discourse, and it's very, very weird.
Weird, I think, is the right term for it. But as we start the show, I just wanted to, as we start the show 20-ish minutes in.
Yeah, my bad.
I wanted to just do a brief question of how, just as we do every year, how did the draft look compared to the board?
It wasn't actually as different as people were saying. So when the Jaguars and the Texans grabbed these tight ends that were like way off of consensus, and the 49ers grabbed Deshaun Stribling and stuff like that, people were like, man, the consensus board's not very good this year. And I think they had actually like a pretty good reason to presuppose that might happen, because this was supposed to be a weak draft, right? Not a lot of people thought that there was as much talent in this draft as there was last year, or that there's going to be in future years. And that's fair. That's probably true. And when that happens, I think it's also fair to say, well, if it's a weak draft, that would mean that player talent, like relative to each other, it's kind of flattened, which makes it easier for you to prefer one player over another because there's such small differences. And so it comes down to slight changes in perspective, or slight preferences in what you want in a player, or slight differences in how they fit for your scheme. Those differences are going to be exaggerated because talent is no longer as defining or distinguishing a factor, right? I think that would have been a pretty good theory, but the consensus board did a really, really good job at predicting the draft this year. I still want to like figure out like 1-to-1, pick for pick how it did, but like This was tied for the best year in terms of number of draft picks that were in the top 300. There were only 20 picks that were made that were not in the top 300, which means 237 of the picks were in the top 300. That's again, 2020 was the best year, and this tied that. And this is also tied for the latest in the draft that someone outside of the top 300 was drafted, which this year happened to be the Vikings at pick 159. The last time that happened at pick 159, it was I think it was 2017. I think Justin Rohrwasser, the kicker for the Patriots, who was caught with the 3%er tattoo. Not a great precedent to set, I suppose. Yeah, I think that the evidence that we have suggests that teams actually were tracking more to the consensus board this year than they were 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 7 years ago. And I've also asked teams about this too. I was like, hey, for the past 3-4 years, like the consensus board and the NFL draft have been a lot closer to each other. Now, it could be because I've been adding more boards to the consensus board, and I think that there's something there. But when I talk to some people in analytics for teams, they're telling me that they think it's a combination of teams are using consensus boards to better figure out player values, not to do their own evaluations, right? Teams don't do that, but rather to figure out where a player might go in the draft. I've heard multiple teams tell me that the way they try to do these mock draft simulations that they do internally, scenario prepping as it were, is that they take a consensus board, they add other types of data to it. So they use mock draft data, either from Benjamin Robinson or gathered internally or from NFL mock draft database or whatever. They include that in there. And then they blend in some mixture of their own grades and in particular red flags, right? And so when they do mock drafts, Jermod McCoy's not going in the first round because they've accounted for that by including their own grades. And so they use the consensus board to figure out where players are going to go in the draft. And that is a market alignment process that brings all of the, if we want to use the market terms, the prices of all of the players, the draft capital cost of all of the players closer together with the rest of the teams and therefore with the consensus board. So that's one element. But the other element that these analysts were telling me about was that actually draft analysts are getting better too because of the democratization of available data, not just in terms of like numerical data like PFF and stuff like that, and getting better at using that data, right? Not just saying this guy has the most receiving yards, this guy has the best PFF grade, but applying it intelligently. Like what happens when we take a look at, average depth of target for receivers that are this size and have this profile, and does that meaningfully tell us something? Like that's a Zachariah Branch question, right? But also, like, it's easier than ever to access college film in all 22. It's easier than ever to access resources that tell you, the best way to watch film or how to learn from watching film. It's just so much easier to become significantly better at draft analysis. And so they're putting together better boards too. And so it's a combination of those two things. So this is one of the best years the consensus board has had in terms of matching what happens in the actual NFL draft. And a good example of this is no one had Giovanni Manu, the British Columbia, I believe, tackle that the Lions drafted. It was a 126 overall, I want to say, somewhere around there. And because he's an international player. But the consensus board did have multiple international players this time around. They had Uar Bernard, the one who actually got drafted. They had Joshua Weru, the Kenyan that also signed with the Eagles. They had the kicker from Japan called the Tokyo Toe, which is incredible. That rules. What a nickname. But like the board had those guys, not in the top 300, but I had rankings on those guys, right? So they're doing a lot better at figuring out who to watch, how to watch, and what other data to apply. And that's so cool. So it is really frustrating, of course, that in perhaps one of the best years we've seen for the consensus board, it has become the subject of ire in this discourse.
Well, let's talk about the Vikings draft. Let's pick something up. Let's talk about something that will not bring you anger or make it weird with any comments about feet. We will just go forward with the Vikings draft.
Yeah, feet not going to come up when we talk about the Vikings draft. Why would it?
Nope, absolutely not. So let's talk about the draft. A lot of picks this year, but the first one that we want to talk about is Caleb Banks, number 18 overall. And let's get it out of the way. This is a guy with a number of foot injuries.
Feet.
Some of us,
We've already broken the rule.
We've already broken the rule.
10 seconds in.
I'm doing my best because I've gotten in trouble before in my life making foot puns when I shouldn't have. So I'm doing my best not to here. I'm avoiding the wine towel. You draft a guy in the first round, and this is a guy you're expecting to start. This is a guy expecting to, be on the franchise for a while. And I gotta say, there's some interesting red flags here. And the question I have is whether or not this is the sort of thing that if we had a real GM and not like a Temu GM, whether or not this is a move that they would be making.
So this is a super interesting conversation. So Matt and I are writing a piece on this pick right now, and obviously this comes up, and it really is kind of a question of the specificity and level of medical knowledge that teams have, because there's this video, and he also tweeted a little bit about this too, from Skoldoc, who is a podiatrist, I believe from Chicago. Sorry if I've doxed you, but I think you said that out loud before. So, who's a Vikings fan. And this is like his job. And so he looks at foot injuries, and we have had enough information from the outside to tell us about the nature of these foot injuries. So he's had a Jones fracture, which is a break in the fifth metatarsal. That's your outside, not toe, you know what I mean? The outside bone. I'm so good at medicine, man. But like there's like bones that lead up to your toes, just like there are bones that lead up to your fingers that you can feel. The outside most that runs up to your pinky toe is the fifth metatarsal, and that one had a fracture. And the ability to like heal a bone is different throughout your body, based off of a number of factors, like how complex the bone structure is, how much blood is running to that bone, and so on. How easy it is to maybe secure and prevent movement during the healing process. I don't know. That one I just made up, but that sounds correct, right? And apparently that one is a relatively, everything's a bone break that, so relative to those, but a relatively easy one to heal because there's good blood flow and it's not a complicated break. And then at the combine, he broke a different metatarsal, the fourth metatarsal, which is, from my understanding, one that requires a little bit more attention, but is not the kind of thing that once it's healed is likely to recur. And this is one where you just kind of have to figure out how much you trust counterintuitive information from an expert, because they've read studies that indicate that this is not the kind of thing that recurs. But in your head, you're just like, well, okay, a very heavy person broke his foot once, missed a season, and then broke the same foot again. Surely this means something. And like, it's very hard for me to get out of that meaning something. Like, it feels very much like that should mean something. And Skoldoc is telling me, and the Vikings, right? That opinion does count, right? They're telling me, actually, no. Like, there's not really much indication that, despite this happening twice, described as a freak accident the second time, that this will happen again. And one thing that I found, I'm still trying to like parse correctly. So Skoldoc, if you're listening to this, here's a question I should have asked you on your YouTube channel. Maybe you would have responded then, or I could just tweet at you. But here I am on a podcast. He mentioned that, and this is my recollection of what he had said. He mentioned that weight is a contributing factor to the likelihood of a break here, but it is not a contributing factor to the recurrence likelihood of the injury, which definitely feels counterintuitive, because if one, then why not the other? So I don't know. I'm curious about that one. Specifically, he seemed to be looking at studies of athletes in particular, so it feels like that's pretty meaningful. But there is some pretty good evidence out there that the nature of his foot injuries are such that they're not likely to recur. And if that's the case, right? If the injury is not that big of a deal, and it's not even going to affect, in all likelihood anyway, not going to affect his availability for the Vikings. Like, he's got this recovery time. I think he already had his surgery in early March. But I might be confusing that with another player. But either way, he is not expected to be able to participate in like OTAs, which, like, okay, that doesn't really bother me. Like, if you were a quarterback, that would be an issue. Hint. But as a defensive lineman, not really, right? Like, the cognitive load that Brian Flores puts on defensive linemen is greater in Minnesota than it is across other schemes, because you do have to learn a number of the front seven positions just by how the scheme is taught and stuff like that. But for the most part, install is just not as important to a defensive lineman. And it's the physicality and the technique training that matter more. So obviously you'd like to have him, and there would be gains to be had if he was there for OTAs, but it's just not as bad as if it was a receiver or a cornerback or something. He should be, based off of the timeline that we have an understanding of, be ready by the start of training camp, and certainly by the end of training camp. So that doesn't affect his availability as far as we're concerned and as far as we know, right? So then you got to ask a question like, well, if that injury essentially doesn't impact his availability, where would he have ranked? And this is some work that we're working on this piece. But I can tell you right now, there's such significant evidence that it was the foot injury specifically that dropped him down these consensus boards, right? Or these mock drafts. And not an inherent evaluation of his potential or talent. And if that is the case, then the consensus board is incorrect here, and he should be in the 20s, which is, it sounds like that's where he would be. Again, I don't know, because we don't have enough big boards produced between January and March to have that data. I used to try to do that before, and it's not a worthwhile exercise in my opinion. I know other people do it, and I think that they get value out of it, but the way that I construct the consensus board, because it relies on such big numbers, makes it really difficult to do that. But because of that, we don't have a good sense of like the talent evaluation aspect of it. We do have a sense of where people think teams will draft him, and that has dropped like a rock since the announcement of the injury. So if that's the case, if the reason he's down at the consensus board, number 37 on the board, is primarily because of the foot injury instead of where the Vikings picked him around 18 or 20 or 22 or whatever, then this isn't the reach, right? Then this isn't something, and this is what I mean by applying context to, ways that the board can be wrong and seeing how they apply to the team. You just have to be careful about it, because you can always make arguments that it was okay to reach on a guy. And so if you find yourself always making those arguments, like we almost kind of did with Donovan Jackson, then probably you're making a mistake. But here it does seem like a genuine reason that this isn't an issue. So if that's the case, right, in an injury-free evaluation environment, what does he look like? Well, that one's tough too, because when he came back and played from his injury, he had clearly lost a lot of his explosiveness and athleticism. So the existence of the injury impacts his evaluation. So I looked at his 2024 stuff. I looked at the 2024 production stuff. And something that Matthew Collar said when I was on his podcast stuck with me that I wanted to dig into and evaluate. When you draft defensive tackles in the first round, nose tackle or three technique, and I, on the stream with Luke, called him a nose tackle, even though he'd played a bunch of three technique in college, because I anticipated that he would move from three technique to nose in the NFL, because he's 327 pounds. And it very much seems like that's not the case. Very much seems like he's going to stay as a three technique, especially because not only did he say that, but then they drafted a pure nose tackle later, which we'll talk about. But you take a look at his three technique snaps, and you see somebody in 2024 whose pressure ability is pretty decent, and then everything else is just kind of not quite there. And what Collar said was that when you draft that defensive tackle in the first round, his quick study suggested that the defensive tackle is just probably going to bust if they don't have good run defense, which we can characterize through PFF run grade. And I looked at that, and the results are really stark. Like, I was shocked at how clean that conclusion was, given how usually stuff like PFF grades are too crude to use as an evaluation mechanism. And you would think, like, once you pass the barrier of being worth drafting in the first round, well, everybody should have a good PFF grade. If you're dominating college, you should be a first round pick or whatever, right? Or vice versa, rather. And so I looked at it, and I was able to organize all of the defensive tackles drafted in the first round since, was it 2015? 2014. 2015. And look at their PFF college grades in pass rush, in overall defense, and in run defense. And the one that stuck out the most was run defense. Now, all of them do have this kind of interesting barrier. So I've got about, 14 successes. Kind of depends on what you count Eric Armstead as. I count him as a success. Got about 14 successes and about 22 misses. So these are people like Taven Bryan, Javon Kinlaw, Mozzie Smith, Robert Kimdiche. When you look at the hit rate and you look at the hits, the run defense grade on average was, I've got it here, 90.0. Whereas if you take a look at the misses, the average is 83. So that's actually a pretty significant difference. And then I also wanted to count. So how many of them had grades above 90? And of the hits, it was 77%. Of the misses, it was 26%. So this very much seems like it's a reasonable proxy, aside from like being able to watch film and actually do the film analysis yourself, a reasonable proxy for telling us that somebody is a really high risk prospect. And the problem is that Caleb Banks has one of the worst run grades out of any of these first round. Oh, the only one worse was Brian Bresee, for the Clemson defensive tackle that went to the Saints. And so he had a 63.4. Caleb Banks had a 67.9. Well, that's concerning. But then I did take a look at overall defense and pass rush grade, because he did have a good pressure rate, right? But his pass rush grade isn't that great. It's 74.2. And the signal is not as strong there, but there is still a signal if you lower the threshold. So for successes, pass rush grades of 80 and higher instead of 90 and higher, 80 and higher, 84% or 85%, 84.6% of the hits had a pass rush grade of 80 and higher, whereas only 39% of the misses had that pass rush grade. So they also have a lower pass rush grade. They've got an average grade of 84.5 for the hits and an average grade of 78.9 for the misses. And he has a 74. Like, it's not that impressive. And that's like a broad kind of like, FPFF or whatever, right? Like a broad level look. And we do have people who don't meet these criteria who've succeeded. DeForest Buckner had an 84 run defense grade, right? Leonard Williams had a 65 pass rush grade. Eric Armstead had a 61 pass rush grade. Again, I think he's a success, but I think that you could say that was borderline. And I think that is a concern. His 1 year of production had some kind of raw production that wasn't, bad to have, the 12% pressure rate or whatever it was. But the kind of contextual production as represented by PFF grades wasn't that good. You take a look at kind of the way that scouting reports characterized him when they're not talking about the injury, and they're talking about this guy who's 6'6", who naturally plays way too high and finds himself pushed out of the play because off of the snap, he jumps up and loses leverage really quickly. And he consistently has a leverage problem. The stuff that's positive about him is outstanding. When people talk about his movement skills for a 327-pounder, it actually reminds me of an offensive tackle. Tyron Smith. Tyler Smith is the guy who replaced him. Tyron Smith, if you don't remember, one of the best tackles to have played in the 2010s to 2020s. It wasn't that long ago. But he played for the Cowboys as the left tackle. He made a number of Pro Bowls, I believe a couple of All-Pros, and he was 340, 350 pounds, and he looked like he was 260, and he moved like it too. He was an outstanding mover. And when I watch, especially the highlights, but when I watch Caleb Banks just move, it reminds me of that. There's no way this guy is 327 pounds. He moves so well. He does move like a 290-pound defensive tackle. Like he moves like Kalijah Cansey. Nuts to me how well he moves. And so that kind of athletic upside is so incredibly tantalizing. And then you know that he does have power, right? A lot of really good movers, even if they're big, don't necessarily have power. And he super has power. He's not a very good tackler. That one doesn't bother me as much. His missed tackle rate is among the highest we've ever seen for first-round defensive tackle. I want to point that out, but I also want to say I don't have a huge issue with it. It's always better if he was a better tackler. But if you've got your hands on somebody in the backfield, someone else on your team is probably turning that into a tackle for loss or at least limiting it to a 3-yard gain. It's obviously better, but it's one of the least of my concerns. If you get into the backfield, impact the running back, you're doing a good job. Obviously, with the sacks, we saw that last year, that not finishing sacks was a huge issue for the Vikings. So it's going to be frustrating, but that's still a pressure, and pressures are good, right? So I don't want to over focus on that element. So that is kind of a lot of that issue. Again, so Matt has written his portion of the article that we're writing together. So it's up to me now to finish it out. And I'm doing kind of the production stuff all while I'm engaged in arguments online, and that's slowing me down. But hopefully we can get that published on Monday, which is when a lot of you will be hearing this anyway. But that we're going to have a discussion about the production profile, about the athleticism profile, about the injury, and about what shows up on film, because that is the primary kind of foundation for analysis. But the top level stuff here is a little concerning to me. I am not nearly as critical of the pick as I was 48, 70 hours, or whenever it was. I think a lot of learning and contextual information has kind of changed my opinion about the injury risk involved here. But I am still concerned about production. He had a really remarkable pre-draft process before the injury. So, there's probably ways to kind of resolve some of the production issues with the way that he took on coaching at the Senior Bowl and stuff. But I don't know. This is a pick that I would be very happy with at like 29, given the new information I have, or 28 maybe, or 27, right? 18 is a bit tough for me, knowing that, the Alec Lewis had said that he was very likely to go in the 20s, and so the Vikings wouldn't have been able to like trade down and grab him. And there were no 3 techniques in the draft. I mean, there's Peter Woods and then like a huge gap until the next 3 technique. So I understand all of that, but it is not from my perspective, not a disaster of a pick or anything like that. It's not a huge reach now that we've got more information, but I still am uncomfortable with it. And I think the Vikings kind of mismanaged a lot of this draft, which I don't think has anything to do with the players, many of whom I like, but rather the way that they grabbed positions and maneuvered around the board. But the Caleb Banks pick is one that's going to be really, I don't know, kind of difficult to figure out and project going forward. It's like people are like, well, it doesn't matter if he's Chris Jones. And it's like, yeah, I know. If I could tell the future, I would tell you, but like I don't. So I'm using the information I have to tell you my comfort level with the pick. And it's not the most comfortable in the world, but it's not nearly as panicky as it was before.
And just looking at it from a purely philosophical point of view, when they were describing why they were picking him and when they were trying to squash concerns about his injury, they had said, we have some of the world's greatest doctors in house.
That was crazy, but also like the more you think about it, the more like, oh, wait, no, the Mayo Clinic is like right there. I kind of get it. Now that the Mayo Clinic doesn't work for you, they work for the Wolves, I guess, but they don't work for you.
they don't work for. I seem to remember every dumb injury the Vikings have had in their recent history, and that just are nagging and just don't go away. So, as a seasoned fan, as a veteran of some of these injuries, I got to tell you, I'm not sold necessarily on the whole thing. Our training staff and doctors are the best in the world. Yeah, you were better than that string that the string of years the Packers had, where everybody just got hurt, and whatever the hell is happening in San Francisco. But it's still an odd thing to use as a explanation as to why you're picking somebody with a broken foot.
Yeah. I was that was a counterproductive thing for them to say, right? Like, it feels like you have to have the best medical staff in the world for us to be comfortable with the pick, as opposed to, by the way, we also have a great medical staff. And also, it is, I shouldn't say it's contradicted, because like injuries can happen to anybody, but it feels like it's contradicted by the Vikings injury history. Like, hey man, like I know the Lewis Scene thing wasn't your fault, but these are the same doctors that signed off on like Andrew Booth, right? Like, you know, like it doesn't feel great knowing the history of injury risks. Like, you signed off on Marcus Davenport, a guy who's only ever been hurt and then went on to continue the trend of only being hurt. I don't think he's had a full season yet. It's like his 9th year. Like, okay, I'm having difficulty. It's not like after Matthew Stafford's first 2 years, the doctor's like, look, he's fine. He's not going to get hurt again. And then that bore out, right? It's like you grabbed Marcus Davenport and told us it was fine. I don't know, man.
This is the same team that, well, the Sharif Floyd thing is unfortunate, but like it just sits there in the middle of the room like, yeah, this was a thing. It's unfortunate.
The Sharif Floyd thing was such a freak accident that and that was so long ago, that like the comparisons are really something, right? It's like a Florida defensive tackle injury problems, but Sharif Floyd didn't have injury problems coming out. A doctor I don't even know what word I was reaching for here.
There are lawsuits involved.
Yeah, there's lawsuits. A doctor allegedly screwed up and nicked a nerve. And I say allegedly, even though I think there's a strong likelihood, because it was settled out of court, which, you know, when you do that, that doesn't mean you're guilty, but not great, right? I'm still so mad at Mike Zimmer about that one, because he just kept on accusing Sharif Floyd of being lazy. And it's like, oh, his nerve wasn't firing? Come on. Anyway, that's a different thing.
Well, let's go to the second pick. 51 overall, second round. Jake Golday, linebacker.
This is an interesting one. So again, another Cincinnati linebacker for the Vikings. They had Eric Wilson, they had Ivan Pace. I'm sure there's another one that we don't know about that they've had recently. But right now they've got 3 on the roster. I thought they were going to grab the other Cincinnati linebacker who went undrafted in undrafted free agency just for kicks. But no, by the way, his name is like Jack Dingle or some made up fairy tale name. Incredible. A great pro day, by the way. But Jake Golday is, Ben Lieber compared him to Anthony Barr, and that's not fair to him and also not extremely accurate, but I super get where that's coming from, because Anthony Barr is 6'5", this guy's 6'4" and change. He's really lengthy. He uses his length really well. And you know, he's supposed to be like a good leader and stuff like that. The problem is that Anthony Barr was an edge rusher in college, and then the Vikings used that skill set really effectively in the NFL, particular to the way Mike Zimmer ran his defenses, and he wasn't really asked to do a lot of complicated coverage stuff. So Anthony Barr had a really good coverage grade, primarily because they were asking him to cover the flats and not do stuff complicated, do stuff that's too complicated, while Eric Kendricks is like managing 3 different conditional coverage rules and like figuring out if someone blows this coverage, do I got to do this? And he's got eyes in the back of his head to figure out when there's going to be a dig route, and he's doing the most. And Anthony Barr is like, hey, there's a guy in the flat. Should I hit him? That's not fair to Anthony Barr. He was a smart linebacker, but like, you get what I mean, right? Like they're very different in terms of what the responsibilities were. And Golday does have some, I shouldn't say Kendricks to him, because Kendricks was undersized, and he didn't have kind of the long arms, so you had to figure out how to shed blocks with technique. And this guy long arms pretty effectively. But we don't have a ton of reps on him outside of space. So he's put in space a lot. He does a lot of overhang stuff, which for people unfamiliar, that's like you're in the slot as a linebacker and you're kind of doing slot coverage. You don't have to be, you know, in man coverage to be an overhang or a slot defender. That's what a lot of people envision. But you're playing to the field side, which is the more open side in college football, and you're chasing down from afar. And he's very athletic, and so he does a really good job chasing down from afar. He's got So Brugler says he's got quick eyes. And I think it was NFL Draft Buzz says he has slow eyes, which is, it's always kind of fun to see direct contradictions among scouting reports because like there's something interesting worth exploring there. But I think what Draft Buzz was getting at is that in complicated spaces where there's a lot of trash to sort through, and based off of like my very limited look at him, this seems to be the case. Whenever there's like stuff to navigate that requires really quick hitting, like you're in the box as a traditional linebacker, he's a little bit slower to react, which is very not Kendrick's, and that creates some problems. But he does react really quickly in space when there's a quick or easier read to make. He's making those reads faster than a lot of people in his position. Super athlete. You kind of want somebody with more day one starter potential drafted in the second round. I'm not going to say I dislike the pick, especially because the Vikings don't have to start him because they've got Eric Wilson and Blake Cashman. But you know, he felt like a high third rounder. They picked him in the second, and it's like, okay, yeah, sure, fine, whatever. I like him, and I like having him on the roster. I'm a sucker for like rangy athletes. That's like, you know, everybody has their biases when they do draft analysis. Mine is for super athletes that test well and have range, and like over production, over recognition capability, over technique. Whereas like Luke Braun is like very technique pilled and loves technique more than the athletic profile. But yeah, I think I would have preferred to have him picked a little bit later. The Vikings, and this is an area where I think the Vikings just weren't navigating the board very well because there were a lot of linebackers that are kind of like this in this year's draft, and so I don't think you had to go out and grab them. I do think you are probably grabbing the most ready out of those linebackers. Like Kyle Lewis is a safety in a linebacker's body. Jacob Rodriguez is so new to the position. And so Jake Golday has the ability to kind of get up and go. And so I get it, but I still think that there were enough of these types of linebackers you could have waited a little bit. Not an awful pick, just like the Caleb Banks stuff. It's like now I'm at a spot where it's like, well, I'm not comfortable with the pick, but I'm not like panicking. And that's where I am with both of these picks so far.
Well, let's go to the third one. Another defensive player, round 3, 82 overall, Dominique Orange, defensive lineman.
Yeah, I think Brian Flores is running the draft. Yeah, like it seems pretty clear at this point that Brian Flores is in charge.
This actually might have also been part of his contract.
Yeah,
you get the first 3 picks of the draft.
Yeah, you got to give me the largest tackles you can find. No, larger, right? Like. These guys are huge, right? So Dom Orange, who actually technically does weigh less than Caleb Banks, he's 6'2" instead of 6'6", so it doesn't look like it. but then I think that's a funny fact. But Big Citrus, who didn't have that nickname until like his second year of college, which is crazy to me. It's like such a great nickname and kind of a natural one. Anyway, this is a good pick, in my opinion. I forget what he was by consensus, and maybe the consensus board didn't like it. Actually, I think it definitely didn't like it. Let me take a look. But getting a squatty nose tackle that can't rush the passer, I say can't. That might be a little bit much, but, you know, that's not the thing that you're hiring him for, right? The guy is only going to pay like 500 to 600 snaps a year if he's like having a good time, right? Let's see, Orange. Okay, actually, he was 70th on the consensus board. He was picked 82 overall. So actually, the consensus board liked it. So we do agree here. That is like, you know, like Andrew Billings was drafted around here, and he's been a nose tackle in the league forever now. A lot of pretty good nose tackles were drafted here. I believe Linval Joseph was drafted in the second round, like 50-ish overall. Like actually, I think around where Jake Golday was drafted. And Linval had a little bit more pass rush capability, right? So it's not that different. Rather, it is a little bit different enough to justify the change in draft slot. But he's been a really effective run defender for Iowa State. Not a ton of production, and he also has a missed tackle problem. Again, don't super care about that. He does have a couple of batted passes, which is kind of fun for a 6'2" nose tackle to have. He does have like some moments where he's like shooting into the backfield. He does have some level of athleticism, but the testing wasn't kind to him in terms of athletic testing. So it's not all there, but as a nose tackle, it matters a lot less than at 3 technique. I like him. He is like consistently managed. I believe both him and Caleb Banks have like had to consistently manage weight. Banks to add a ton of weight, and then I believe Orange has had to lose a bunch of weight. He's done it really effectively. He was on the Feldman freak list twice. He squats like 650. So now you have your answer to Jalen Hurts, I guess. And here I think we're noticing, he had to trim down to 325 pounds. I was right. He was 408 pounds as a senior in high school. That was it. Which, like, goodness. But at this point, I think we're noticing a pattern with the Vikings. And I don't mean positionally, and I don't mean, athletically or production or whatever. I mean, like, when you read the Brugler profiles on these guys, all of them have a note, and it's important to kind of do this for a bunch of players so you get like a good sense of how common this is. But the Vikings specifically all seem to have like this note added to them about how amazing they are in the locker room, how much of a culture changer they are, how like good of a leader in the program they are. And you can see it for like Sonny Styles got it, right? Like, but I don't believe, I'll check real quick, but I don't believe Caleb Downs got it. Like he's very businesslike in his attitude and stuff like that, which is great. He was a team captain, but the way that they talk about the guys that the Vikings drafted, superlative in terms of like character and locker room stuff. So like Spencer Fano is like fun, gregarious personality. And like Dom Orange was like, he was a selfish kid in high school. And then the Iowa State culture changed him. And then he became the kid that started changing other people when they started joining. Like he's a junior and you've got a freshman coming in and you see somebody not working hard. And now he's the one establishing the culture in the Iowa State locker room. And you see that with Jake Golday and you see that with Caleb Banks a little bit. That one is interesting though, to go back to Caleb Banks real quick, because most of the stuff that we've learned about his character profile have been really positive, whether it's from, Mel Kiper on TV or Daniel Jeremiah or whatever, or from, the Brugler scouting guide. Like a lot of them are like, hey, he didn't have to come back from the broken foot to play in a lost season for Florida. And he chose to do it. And he loves playing football. And he's taken this stuff really seriously, great. That's awesome. Bob McGinn, who is known for grabbing a bunch of quotes from scouts and putting them into pieces and stuff like that. For people who don't know, I've had a tweet go viral a couple of times where I quote, or actually it's a screenshot of a Bob McGinn report about Marshall Yanda, where a scout says, I think he's soft. Marshall Yanda, by the way, like multiple All-Pro. I think he's kind of soft. He was raised by women. And it's like, what? And it's like, I just don't trust the guy who's only been raised by women. And it's like, there's so much going on here that's like obviously sexist and also probably racist, right? Because like the situations that a lot of players grow up in. But like, what? So I just want to be like clear that like, I don't think Bob McGinn is making up quotes from scouts or refusing to present the full picture of the wide spectrum of quotes he receives, but like to take some of this with a grain of salt. On the other hand, Bob McGinn also does generally have the most accurate top 100 in the industry. He regularly places in the top 5 of placing players in the top 100 who end up getting drafted in the top 100. So there's something, right? But like, there's a lot of airing out that feels unnecessary and actually not even that helpful. With all of that context in mind, there's a guy, at least one guy here, who calls Caleb Banks lazy, says there's a bunch of motivation problems, some BS to him, some excuses. There's nothing out there that says he will give us his best. He's got a lot of your talented underachiever qualities that a lot of D linemen have. A different scout says lacks explosiveness, grit, and desire, right? Like, okay, that's interesting because it contradicts 3 or 4 different people when they talk about his off field. Anyway, this wasn't to talk about Caleb Banks again. I just thought that was an interesting note because we will continue to see this as we kind of go through these draft profiles of this year being particular for grabbing a lot of guys that are notable, at least in the Brugler scouting guide, for being like high level leaders. So that's something to kind of keep in mind.
Well, next up is in the third round, 97th overall. We're going to have 2 picks in a row here. 97th overall, Caleb Tiernan, offensive lineman. We finally have an offensive lineman.
Yeah, and the classic question, can he play guard? No idea. He's an interesting one because he's 6'7". Had to maneuver that one. He's 6'7", and 5'8", so he's almost 6'8". 323 pounds. And you would think, oh, somebody that tall, he could probably only play tackle, right? And that's what he played at Northwestern, right? But he only has 32-inch arms, which is very short for a tackle. And we had this debate with like Will Campbell, like way back, and then other prospects before that. Like Forrest Lamp, I think that he was subject to that debate. A different guy that the Patriots drafted before Will Campbell also had that discourse. We see this discourse a lot, but usually with like first round picks. Joe Thomas purportedly has short arms. Now, that one's funny because his listed measurement on a website listed him as 32.5-inch arms, and it turns out that was just a database error, and he actually did have longer arms than that. But the point stands that if you've got movement capability, your arm length matters less. It's like a sliding scale, essentially. How much more do you need movement if your arm length isn't completely there? So there's a couple of people that think he should be a guard, but like 6'7" guards are really rare for a reason. Like I think Mike Harris was 6'5", and Mike Zimmer was pretty hesitant about playing him at guard. When they moved Oli Udoh to guard, that was the primary question. Although one of the primary questions for Oli Udoh was less his height and more his arm length. It was like 35 inches, right? These really long arms. So he doesn't have that. So it's a really interesting problem, especially when you've got like Kyler Murray as your quarterback. He's not going to start, so it's not like, or hopefully he's not going to start, like cross your fingers, right? Because he's like a backup. But that's an interesting problem. And then you add in some other unique body type concerns. So he was a pretty decent mover at Northwestern. When you take a look at his testing, he's got the worst 3-cone measurement I've seen out of a top 100 pick at tackle. 8.08 seconds. Just like, good Lord, that's slow. And the thing about the 3-cone is that they kind of let you run that one a lot. Now, it was at a pro day, not the combine. At the combine, you can run it as many times as you want. But at your pro day, they do let you to run it multiple times, not just twice, but like multiple times. Like Jalen Ferguson, RIP, ran it 14 times at his pro day. So he ran an 8.08 second 3-cone. That's wild. But he also ran a 4.71 second short shuttle, which is not fast, but it's also not slow. It's not 8.08 seconds in the 3-cone slow. And these are highly correlated agility drills. And given that he's 323 pounds, I would say that a 4.7 second short shuttle, which translates much more on the offensive line than the 3-cone does, like that's above average. It's not amazing. It is above average. So you've got these two competing movement profiles. You've got kind of some competing explosion profiles, 35.5 in the vertical. That's quite good. 9.3 in the broad is okay. But yeah, and then on top of that, like you take a look at his like grades. I haven't watched a ton of them. I saw him move a little bit. That was nice. I watched basically half a game. But his grades are really interesting because he's an elite, again, PFF, elite pass protector, right? His pass blocking grades for like, I think the past 3 years are all really high level. But his run blocking grades are catastrophically bad. He plays really high, so that's not, again, 6'7". It's not surprising, right? But like he also doesn't bend his knees all that often or all that well. I shouldn't say often. Everyone bends their knees often, but not deeply, right? And so he's leaning a lot, and that makes him unbalanced. He ends up on the ground a lot. And so like that presents a problem because A, he's probably going to be a swing tackle competing with Walter Rouse. He's primarily played left tackle in his career. But like B, if you're a swing tackle, one of the benefits that you might be able to provide is as a sixth man. or a sixth offensive lineman. And if he's just not a good run blocker, really, you're probably not going to have a jumbo package this year if you're the Vikings. And he's the primary swing tackle. I don't hate the pick. It's a unique pick, and I don't know what to do with it. I think he's probably got a lot of potential just because of the movement that you see on film, and that height would suggest there's probably something like his wingspan is not too bad, even though his arm length is. But yeah, I don't know. He's a really good pass blocker, like really good, and like with like true pass blocking sets. Like there's a lot of offensive tackles that have really good pass blocking grades, and then like they gave up like 2 pressures all year or 0 pressures. I believe Forrest Lamp didn't give up a sack for 3 years, right? And the problem is some of these guys, like Antonio Garcia from Troy, which is like a huge, like a throwback from way back. He didn't allow a sack in like 3 years. But they also got rid of the ball in half a second in that offense. He played in an offense that required him to pass protect like an NFL tackle, and he did pretty good at doing that. So I don't know. I'm really curious about it.
Next up, literally the next pick, round 3, 98 overall, Jacoby Thomas, a safety out of Miami.
Yeah, that one was much more of a head scratcher from like the consensus board, right? So I've got like the pick for pick grades. I should just pull that up. There were a lot of safeties that the Vikings could have picked, including, I believe, Emmanuel McNeil-Warren hadn't gone yet, and that was a first round. Well, no, maybe he had. I can just take a look at that right now. So he went 58. So the Vikings passed over him for Jake Goldday. That was it. But you had a couple of safeties. I believe they just missed out on AJ Halsey. Yeah, they did. Over at 78. But yeah, I think that my understanding is that the Vikings were pretty interested in some other offensive linemen, but they avoided the trap that the Jaguars made to grab Jalen Husky, which is good. They didn't get Kamari Ramsey, who I know a couple of people dislike. I liked Zakee Wheatley, the Penn State Panther, the Penn State safety drafted by the Panthers, and the Texas safety a little bit. Jalen Kilgore, I thought, was probably more appropriate to this pick slot. So that one was an interesting one. But I get it. Like I get where that one comes from. So he was ranked 177th on the consensus board, picked at 98th. I get where this one comes from because if you look at what he did in the playoffs for Miami, he does everything that you would expect the Brian Flores safety to do, which is like hit people and then get up and hit them again. It was just, I'm going to hit you every possible time that I can, and also maybe sometimes that I'm not allowed to. He did get penalized like 3 times in the playoffs. And he almost got ejected from the game for like demolishing Fernando Mendoza, which like, hey man, don't do that. But like, I don't hate that, like, hey, whoa, don't get ejected, but like get close. That's fine. So he's a really, really physical player, which is awesome. His coverage capability is not the most amazing, which like if you've got like a really good hitter and he's going in the 3rd round, like that you could probably have guessed that was going to be on offer, right? But he does fit the scheme like very well because of that. Like he's a blitzer, he's a really strong tackler, he does a fair amount of slot stuff. He does kind of like there's some Eric Wilson elements in his game, which Eric Wilson was actually a former safety, so I guess that kind of makes sense. Where he'll just like overrun plays. I think that there's the first couple of times you watch him, you think, wow, he's reacting really quickly. He has really fast eyes. And that's not really it. He's just extremely eager. And then on the way to whatever he's going to, he'll figure it out, which I like sympathize with a lot. Like I get you, my guy. But that's not the greatest thing in a football player. And so he'll overrun plays and misses gap assignments and stuff like that. Which, I mean, that makes him a great special teamer. Eric Wilson, same problem, great special teamer. Makes him a great special teamer. But yeah, not. I think his workouts were fine in this regard. Actually, no, they weren't. Yeah, he ran a 4.32 short shuttle, so whatever. But like his turn and recoverability in man coverage, which didn't happen all that often, not there. He's very physical, but he's not always winning. Right? He's like 211 pounds. He weighed 214 at his pro day, 211 at the combine. And so he's not like a small safety, but he does like lose a lot. And part of that is because he launches himself. So he's losing a lot of leverage. He doesn't get to use the ground consistently throughout the tackle to kind of help generate leverage. So, that's like an issue. But primarily, I'm a little bit worried that it's like, well, you've got Josh Metellus. You've got this guy. You don't have a coverage safety unless you're going to trust Theo Jackson or Jay Ward. And that's kind of the guy that I wanted. I wanted a coverage safety. I wanted you to draft, like, I don't care if it was Dylan Thieneman or whoever. I wanted you to like draft a guy that you could put up top. The Vikings run quarter coverage a lot with Brian Flores. So it's not that important, but there's a huge difference. We've seen it. A huge difference when Harrison Smith has the ability to play every snap as opposed to 10 snaps, or when you've got Cameron Bynum on the team. What it's like to have a safety capable of single high coverage, which they will rotate to, right? It's a deception defense. In order for you to be a deception defense, you have to be multiple. So you have to be able to do cover 1, cover 3 if you're going to continue to throw a bunch of different looks at someone. Otherwise, everyone knows you're always running cover 4, cover 2. And then you get beat on like Mills or something. So you do have to do that. And I just don't know that they've got that. Now, he's better at turnovers than like Theo Jackson is. He gets his hands on the ball and he tends to hold on, which is nice. But I just don't know that he's got the instincts in coverage. So this is like, I liked the Dom Orange pick. I'm okay with the Caleb Tiernan pick. I'm slightly uncomfortable with the first 2 picks, the Jake Golday and Caleb Banks picks. This one, I think, is like the first true, I think, significant miss in terms of value. I totally get why he's a Brian Flores safety. And the safeties were kind of going in a weird order, so we can't say for sure he would have been available around pick 150 or whenever. But I just don't think the coverage is there. And that is the primary element that's missing from the safety group. I don't think you need more Josh Metelluses. I think one Josh Metellus is outstanding, but you need to support him with coverage on the back end. And I don't know that you've got that.
And it's worth noting that the Vikings may have picked up a Hall of Fame, at least pedigree, safety as an undrafted free agent. We'll get to him shortly. Let's go to round 5, 159th overall, Max Bredesen, fullback.
This is one where the consensus board is like 317. I don't harp on that as much for positions that the consensus board just isn't as good at. So punter, kicker, long snapper, which probably shouldn't draft a long snapper anyway. And as we know, no kickers, but whatever, right? They're not that good at those positions, and fullback is one of those positions. In fact, probably it seems like based off of the draft, assuming that provides us with significant information, not that good at blocking tight ends either. That said, probably a reach, not like a huge one. I probably would have waited one more round. So like he's 317. They draft him at, 159. Probably could have grabbed them at like 198 or whatever, right? But cool. I don't know a ton about him. I wasn't able to get around to watching him, unfortunately, so I can't give as much on him. He doesn't have a receiving profile, as far as I could tell. Like when you take a look at his PFF numbers and stuff like that, there's just not a ton for us to work with. You got like 4 catches, I believe. So, and he's listed as like a tight end for Michigan, right? But like, he's a fullback. What is it? 11 yards, 2 receptions. That was it. That's what he did last year. So that's like not the thing he's going to do, right? He's got pretty decent pass blocking grades. Let's take a look at his run blocking. Pretty good run blocking grades. Not amazing. Pretty good. Like an 85.2 in his 5th year at Michigan. But yeah, that's like basic what I can tell you. I can also tell you the story that you've probably already heard if you're listening to this, but it is kind of fun. Yeah, the JJ McCarthy was just chilling with them when the Vikings called him. Like they're just friends, right? It wasn't even that the JJ McCarthy knew. They're really good friends, and he was hanging out supporting his friend, and then the Vikings called him, and and then for the media call, he interrupted the call and was like, "Yo, let's go," which is cool. I like that. It's fun. JJ's got a friend, which I don't know, do we feel like he needs one? Sure, why not? Here you go.
Yeah, I'm just not sure I'm ready to get a Bredesen jersey yet.
Nah, yeah, well, it's tough to move on, and
it's very tough. So you gotta make it. Sometimes you gotta make sure that you're okay first.
I will say though, it is kind of nice that we went from one food name to another kind of food
right.
name. That's pretty good. That's like if you don't have a Polish name, at least have a food name. You know, at fullback.
Yes. Let's go next up to round 5, 163 overall. Charles Demings, cornerback. We finally get a corner.
I love this guy. So the consensus board was like okay with him or whatever, right? So he's a small school guy, which I'm not going to say they're underrated by the consensus board, especially not this year when small school guys just weren't going. There were like 2 group of 6 players to go in the first 3 rounds. This is the latest an FCS player to ever been drafted. And there's like a bunch of reasons for that, but primarily it's like the transfer portal and stuff like that, and NIL. So the combination of like really quick and easy transfers and NIL, which a lot of people who are fans of FCS football treat as like a crisis. I don't. It feels like players get to move to where they want and can maximize their value, and that does create some problems for FCS programs. But like, I think good for them, like good for the players. But anyway, he had some. Oh, actually, the consensus board did like him. He's 151 on the board. He's okay. First of all, like if you've not watched the presser that he had with the media, go and watch that, especially the first half. This is like an insanely charismatic class. Like I'm dogging the class a little bit, which sucks. But like Caleb Banks and Charles, we should call him Chuck. He prefers to be called Chuck. Are delightful, truly delightful people. So I hope I'm wrong about Banks when he turns into like a Chris Jones level player. I keep on saying Chris Jones because A, 6'6" defensive tackle, but B, that's who he models his game after. But when the media asked him, like, hey, I've seen your name Chuck. Do you prefer to go by like Chuck or Charles or Charlie? And he goes, oh, I prefer Chuck, but like whatever you want to call me Charlie, whatever. You can call me Chuck D. And I was like, Dad, rules. Dad, the Vikings got Chuck D. Can you believe that, man?
It's going to take an army of millions to stop this.
So he was at the Senior Bowl. He was initially invited to the Shrine Bowl, so wanted to see him there, but couldn't. But he was at the Senior Bowl and he did really well at the Senior Bowl. 6'1", he was listed at 6'2", I believe, at the Senior Bowl, but 6'1" and like 3/8 or something like that. And really fast. Like I believe it was reported that he ran like a 4.37 or something like that. I think it was like his APT time, which is the closest we have to an official time at the combine at the combine. Yeah, it was a 4.41. So he ran a 4.41 at 6'1", 193 pounds. He has 32-inch arms. So the model that I use for cornerback athleticism, which we're going to work on this year. It's a big project to kind of update and make the model a lot better. But the old model that I used, which I just want to remind people, I'm like not a data scientist. I just kind of hacked this together. When I put it together, it found that there was a pretty significant boost when you added a bonus essentially for arm length. And the cutoff for that was 32-inch arms. And so he meets that cutoff, so he'd get the bonus. But like we've been seeing fewer and fewer cornerbacks with that kind of arm length after we hit like a rash of them kind of in the 2015-ish era, like after the Seahawks had proven that like arm length could help you a lot. But we're back. We found this guy. The thing about him running a 4.41 at the combine is A, that was the least impressive of the 3 drills he did at the combine. But B, he was hurt. He did all of this while hurt. So he ran a 4.41 with a 1.55 10 split 155, incredible, really great. But he was rumored to be able to break the vertical jump record at the combine, which for people who don't know is 46 inches. That was, and so like players, not players he was working out with, but also players he was working out with, players he didn't know would walk up to him and be like, hey man, I hear you're going to break the vert record. Like that was like just a thing. And he couldn't because he was hurt. He was dealing with an injury. And when the media asked him about it, he was like, oh, I'm sorry. I couldn't jump as high as I wanted to. It's a real big problem. He jumped 42 inches. Like, get out. That's crazy. At 193 pounds. And then his broad jump was like 11 feet. That incredible stuff. Incredible stuff. His agility scores, which he didn't do at the combine, he did at the pro day. Not great. Don't worry about it. 7.28 3 cone, 4.25 short shuttle. Not very good. But all this other stuff is really great. But you can kind of see it when you get to watch him play. And I was able to watch him play way back in January. Very few players I watched back in January because I was mostly, schmoozing at the Senior Bowl instead of like watching football or whatever it is people do there. But
I mean, some people watch football. Some people hang out at the hotel with reporters.
Yeah, and it turns out that's like a huge value add for me, which I did not expect.
Like, I didn't know I could do that.
Well, it's not just that. It's like I've got an insane story. I got to write incredible stuff just from like, I don't know who these players are, but like, you got something you want to say to me? That's so cool. Tell me more, But yeah. So I was actually able to watch some film on him, and I wish I had more to say that wasn't already in the Dane Blugler draft guide. I can confirm the things that he says, right? He plays really physically, plays pretty powerfully and strong, and he knows how to use his size, which like a lot of cornerbacks, especially once you draft in like the 5th round, don't know how to use their size if they have it, right? But he has a good understanding of how to kind of use his arms to manipulate the route path for receivers. So he's really good at press jam and stuff like that. He mentioned actually in the media session, like they asked him like, what schemes did you run? And he gave so much detail. It was awesome. So he had 3 different defensive coordinators over at Stephen F. Austin, and they all ran different schemes. And so his second year, he ran a bunch of cover 4, which is what the Vikings do a lot of. It's a different cover 4 than a lot of colleges, but that's a really great experience that he has. He ran a fair amount of cover 2, and he ran a fair amount of press man coverage. I believe that was his 3rd year. A ton of press man coverage, which is great because like you don't get college corners that do press coverage. Like you get a couple out of Toledo, which happens every year, and that's why we see so many Toledo defensive backs ranked so highly year to year to year. But you just don't get a lot of press man corners in college. And part of that is just because like, A, that's a really difficult technique to teach, but like B, the fact that we've got a field side and a boundary side where there's so much more space makes it more dangerous to be a press corner. Like it's not just like a laziness thing. But he did it and he did really well. And what's interesting is that like when in press coverage, his fluidity was really good. So like you set a jam up, then the receiver runs past you, and then you turn around and run with the receiver. Great. His fluidity is good there. His fluidity like throughout the route stem was not there, which I find really interesting. And I don't know if that sounds like it could be a technique thing. Because as the route breaks on an over route or something like that, he just like slows down, and maybe it's like a sustained thing. Maybe he doesn't run that fast maybe his flying 20 isn't there. Right. But it just does seem like his run and turn ability and his recovery ability late in the route is just like not quite there, despite having like this lateral agility that he clearly has. And I think a lot of it happens like when the ball is in the air, he like slows down, which is not great. But yeah, he does get his hands on the ball like all the time. Which is pretty outstanding. So he had in 2023 he had 10 pass deflections. 2024 he had 12. 2025 he had 9. Those were incredible numbers. He had 2 picks those first 2 years and 4 picks his final year. So outstanding. Really good at that. So like him slowing down with the ball in the air, not like it's not like a Chris Cook thing, if you remember him, where like as soon as the ball was in the air, he just became blind. And you're like, oh, dude, the ball is right. Just get it, dude. Chris Boyd did the same thing, right? It wasn't like that. But like at the NFL level, it's going to be tough. And there's just like not a ton of tape of him up against FBS cornerbacks. So yeah, and he could have transferred up, but he didn't because he wanted to establish a legacy over Stephen F. Austin, which like that feels really cool. But yeah, he didn't get a ton of offers coming out despite his size. He must have been like a late bloomer. So for him to kind of come into his size and athleticism and be a full athlete, that's really cool. But yeah, the agility numbers are a concern. The late in the route fluidity is a concern. I would argue he's not as good in zone coverage as Dane might have argued. But yeah, these are all things that make you a 5th round receiver, but like, or a cornerback. But like, I think he should have been drafted sooner than that. I like him a lot. And God, so he ends up being a leader of every group he's in. So he ended up immediately becoming the leader of his workout group, which contained multiple, 1st and 2nd round aspirational picks. And then at the Senior Bowl, when he showed up, he immediately led that group too. Like it's impossible for me to explain how gregarious and like infectious his charisma is. Just like watch the presser. It's outstanding.
Next up, round 6, 198th overall, Damon Claiborne.
Oh, fast. Back. So fast.
Tiny, fast running back.
So he ran like a 4.37 at the combine. And like you say tiny, and he is. He's 5'9". But he did it at 188 pounds, which is not the heaviest running back in the world by any means. It's kind of light for a running back. But when we talk about scat backs, we can get all the way down to like 160, 170. He's not like that. He is light for a running back, but he is not like so concerningly light that, the time is irrelevant, right? And he didn't run any agilities. He didn't do any at the pro day. I believe he had a groin or something like that. But he did seem to possess agility. So as a smaller, faster running back, he doesn't absorb contact as well. So Dane Brugler compared him to like Devon A-Chain, which is like, I think Brugler is giving you a type and not a talent level. Otherwise, this guy will go in the 1st round. And I get it. Like I understand like incredible speed when his eyes are where they need to be. He's good at both zone and gap running. But like he's not as agile. He's pretty agile, but he's not as agile as A-Chain. But like A-Chain like takes on contact. And that like, and if I were to have a bias for running backs, which I explained this to Luke on the stream too, I love big backs with balance. Like that's like, give me a million like Damian Harris's who did not turn out to be a good running back in the NFL, but like those guys are my jam. I liked Jonah Coleman in this draft. I like Marshawn Lynch and Adrian Peterson. Adrian Peterson, not characteristically a big back, but like he played like one. So let's just act like he was, right? Tall, I guess. But like incredible contact balance. Like that's the thing I love. Like that's why I liked Kareem Hunt coming out of Toledo, is that his balance was outstanding. So that's like my deal. And so I like Claiborne, but like I've seen Ty Chandler and Kene Nwangwu, and their issue wasn't necessarily their balance, it was their eyes. But man, I the balance thing, because you're always going to get hit as a running back. And the stuff that we talk about with running backs, like how much of their production they control is relatively small, because a lot of it is blocking and scheme and play calling. And so like that's why we have the running backs don't matter conversation. But to the extent that they do control their production, a lot of it is in like how they handle stuff like vision at the line of scrimmage, pass protection, of course, which is not going to be this guy's job at all. And how, when someone does hit you, how you respond, right? And it's not an attitude thing. He runs into people, which is funny to see because he's not playing in the FCS. He's played at Wake Forest, right? But like, I would say that there's a lot of potential here, but it feels like he's a kick returner that maybe could play running back. More than anything else, he doesn't have a ton of ball security. He doesn't have, like I mentioned, the contact balance, and his eyes are just not so fast that I would say that you've got a chain like capability, which, like, I'm giving you a lot of negatives. This is a good pick. Like, it's a 6th round pick where I see what his opportunities are and what his potential is and what he could do. And I think that he's got a pretty good chance of making the roster, which for a 6th round pick is a hit. So I like the pick. I just want to say, like, hey, he's a 4.37 guy, but don't get like way out over your skis. This is a good pick.
Finally, the last pick of the draft was round 7, 235 overall. Gavin Gerhardt, center out of Cincinnati.
Yeah, I haven't heard of this guy in my life. I mean, I heard of him after the Vikings drafted him, which, like, that's nice. I don't have like a ton on him, if I'm being honest. Dane doesn't have a ton on him. When I was looking up centers, because I did want to like jump on a stream and talk about a guy, right? When I was looking up centers, this guy just never came up. He's the 24th ranked center in Dane Brugler's big board. He is ranked 612, or, you know, if you're from Minnesota, 612. Let's go. He's ranked 612, right, on the consensus big board. So I just never got around to him. He is the consensus big board's 26th rank center. So I don't have a ton on him. He's 309 pounds. He ran a 1.84 10-yard split, which is relatively slow. He ran a 4.67 short shuttle, which is relatively quick. His vert's not there. His broad is not there. And he's 6'4", so he's a little bit tall for a center. I don't have a ton on him. And he's not even related to Toby. That's a different spelling for Gerhardt. I mean, I guess I don't know for a fact that he's not related to Toby, but it's unlikely, right? Given the name. I guess, yeah. Kelsey's also a center from Cincinnati, so that's for you.
Yeah, let's go with that. The Vikings also had a number of undrafted free agents that were given opportunities. Most of them don't matter. These two do.
Correct. Yeah.
Prove me wrong, people who have just been signed. I will be happy to be wrong. However, important to note that Jacob Thomas, standout safety from the college football playoff participants, James Madison University, has made it. Good for him.
I love that there's a Jacoby Thomas and a Jacob Thomas. It's so good, dude. What a great bit. And to do it with a James Madison, that's so awesome.
If you have a James Madison player on the team, you have to get rid of Carson Wentz. Like, that doesn't work.
Yeah, no, that's a locker room problem, and that is clearly Carson Wentz's fault, no one else's.
No one else's. I think they might have just also picked up another undrafted free agent that is also a Bison alum. So
we don't got to worry about that. No. So I was able to scrounge up a scouting report on this guy, which you don't always get to do for undrafted free agents. I did, of course, watch my Dukes throughout the season and in the playoff game, which we don't have to talk about the playoff game because obviously what happened there when they got blown out is that it was all the refs. But they got demolished by the refs.
As opposed to the game that we watched in person where it was absolutely the ref's fault.
That was. Right? Yeah, they still won it, though. That was crazy. But yeah, so the scouting report, I shout out to Bleacher Report, by the way, because Dane doesn't have the scouting report, but Bleacher Report does. So head on over, man. But the scouting report says he's got like pretty good athleticism. He's a pretty smooth player, which is fine, right? That's nice because we're not getting a lot of those in the secondary of the backfield outside of like Chuck D. But I will say that I would like a fast safety at some point. Like, I feel like that's not like too much to ask, right? Like, I feel like that makes sense to ask for that. But he does move with a lot more, I think, fluidity than Jacoby Thomas does, which is not to say he's a better safety. I mean, he's from James Madison, he probably is. But you know, he moves with a lot more fluidity. You actually can see it in his workout numbers. So he had what I would call a white wide receiver 3 cone, which is 6.84 seconds. Kind of the sub 6'9" three cones are like, oh, okay, that's a Julian Edelman time. All right, I got you. Really incredible three cone. 4-2-1 short shuttle, which is all right. 10-1 broad jump, that's okay. 36.5 invert, that's okay. 4-4-4 40-yard dash, which you don't find in undrafted safeties, especially because he's not 180 pounds. He's 215. So he's got like a lot, I think, going for him. That 10-yard split, though, does concern me because that does kind of control safety outcomes a lot more than the 40-yard dash does. So he had a 1.63 second 40-yard split, or 10-yard split, which like I just named a center with a similar one that I thought was pretty bad for a center. So like that's a concerning one. But he's got downhill safety, attacks at the line of scrimmage, comes in over the top, which is pretty fun. He did play man coverage a fair amount over at Jameis Madison, so he'd play like as a big nickel, which is like this is a great defense to go to if you're part of like three safety sets. That's where he went. He did a bunch of man coverage against tight ends. He played in the slot against receivers a little bit, but like he's not the most amazing tackler in the world. He needs to wrap up a little bit better. He tends to try to predict instead of react, I guess is the best way to put it. Like he tries to anticipate where the play is going to go instead of using kind of all the cues that are occurring within the play to react quickly. And so sometimes he's like pretty radically out of position. He can be manipulated by quarterback eyes. I don't think that that's like a devastating, like I think he can get out of that, but that's like another thing. 4 to 215 pound safety, you want to see a little bit more power. And again, 4.44, pretty good, right? But I'm just worried about his acceleration. That three cone is outstanding, but I think you can kind of see the acceleration problems in the explosive workouts and in the short shuttle where it's not all there. This is, I'll say, a much more intriguing profile than one would expect for an undrafted free agent safety. Also, given the Vikings safety room, pretty reasonable shot that he could actually do something, which is nuts.
Justice had that running bit about the receiver for the Packers and how he was like Canton bound. Like
put on the gold jacket. Yeah.
That's. I think that needs to be our push.
Yeah, put on the gold jacket.
Yep, for Jacob Thomas.
What's great is that like you preview like, hey, there might be a Hall of Fame undrafted free agent, and I would imagine some like 80% of listeners were like, oh yeah, there is a guy named Marcus Allen. Who's gonna nope. Not who we're talking about.
We got Jacob Thomas, senior. Listen, he started, according to the write-up on the JMU website, literally on the JMU website, he did start all 14 games at strong safety. So, yeah,
hey,
we got something here, potentially. I would love to pick up a number 7 Thomas jersey. Whatever he ends up picking for the Vikings, it'll be like 58 or something.
Yeah.
Just like the random, like you're not going to make the team, so here's your number.
You have an edge rusher number for no reason.
Yeah. Exactly. We didn't actually spell your last name correctly on the back of this too. So please return it to us at the. No, that's actually something that Cincinnati would do. Never mind. The other undrafted free agent that matters is Brett Thorson, punter, Georgia. Also notable because he's an International Player Pathway Program selection.
Yeah, so that means roster exemption time, baby.
Woo!
Let's go.
Between that and getting the punter, you're really just it's just so nice to see the workings of a real GM at heart. We're not going to know what the hell we're doing for trades, which we'll get into. We're not going to know what we're doing for like moving around the board or selecting anything, but we will kill two birds with one stone once.
Yeah, so I believe he is Alex Katzen's top punter, which we did have him on the podcast to talk about that, which is great. I'm glad we made him do that because it suddenly became relevant. He is Dane's second punter. So Ryan Eckley is Dane's top punter, which I believe Katzen hated. So I trust Dane on a lot of things. I'm going to take Katzen when it comes to punters. The guy is psychotic, which is what you want in a special teams analyst. But yeah, Thorson, pretty good hang time, which is like one of the elements that's like pretty difficult to find in college punters because there's a lot of one-step punts and a lot of moving punts. I can't believe we're talking about it like this. I remember I was sending like some videos of like a Ray Guy award-winning punter to Chris Cluey, and I was like, "Hey, do you think this guy's got it? Because like, look at his net average; it's incredible." And you were talking about how important net is and not gross when we're talking about punters. And he looks at it and he's like, he doesn't have it. I was like, what the? Tell me more, Chris. And it was because he would punt off of one step and move, like the pocket would move. Like as soon as the long snapping would occur, like everybody's taking a train out to the sideline and he's punting on the sideline. And it's like, oh, that's why his net is good, because you have a punting scheme of all things. And he can just do it, which like we're getting out of Australian punters. Like that's kind of the deal. But it is kind of cool that he can just kind of punt. And he's got a really good hang time. He's got a really good average. We'll see how good of a holder he is. I believe Casson said he's a pretty good holder. In fact, he has the third longest hang time in college football last year. Okay. Incredible. And of the people with long hang times, right? So if we take a look at the top 10 hang times, he has the lowest return percentage and the lowest return yards and the lowest return or the third lowest return average. Like pretty good stats, you know, for what stats we have available to us at punters. His net is quite good at 43.4. Now there are again others with higher nets, but these guys are like just booting it down the field with no regard for hang time, which works in college, but it does not work in the NFL, which is why Matt Araiza had to completely change his punting style after he was cleared of allegations. If we take a look at all of the punters with a net over 42, he has by far the longest hang time. So there's something here. This guy can boot it, and appropriately to what the NFL needs for a guy who can boot it.
So there's a number of other undrafted free agents. We will not be getting into them. There's not a ton of information on them, but we wanted to point out these two specifically. Also, any chance we get to mention James Madison, we legally have to do after attending the two games of theirs. So. Yeah. Just how it works. Let's talk about the Jonathan Grenard trade for a moment, because there were some fans who were upset that they didn't get enough from the Eagles.
Yeah. So I get it, and I don't want to like push back too hard, because I think there is a pretty good argument that the Vikings screwed themselves here. I am not at that point, but like you see an elite player like Jonathan Grenard. You see how much he helps the defense. Obviously, he doesn't have a ton of sacks, but like if you're listening to this podcast, you know that that's not the whole story. He's a really productive player. And trading a player like that for 2/3 should feel bad. It feels bad. It sucks. You're not going to get, likelihood. It's always possible, right? But you're very much not likely to get a player nearly as good as Grenard with 2/3 if you package them together and trade it up to get a better third, which you're not packaging them together to get into the second round. You're packaging together to get a better third, because it is the Eagles' future third and the third that they actually had, which were both pretty late. That guy is not going to be, in all likelihood, nearly as good. I should say on average, nearly as good as Jonathan Grenard. But like that is not what an NFL trade is about. You are trading contracts, not players. And that's important, because the Eagles immediately signed him to a 4-year, $100 million deal. Now, could the Vikings have afforded that, and is he worth that? Both of those things are true. But the Vikings, it seems like, are planning to make some really significant moves in 2027. And I say seems like because I think it is kind of absurd that that's probably true, because the Vikings are nowhere near being good enough to be like, we're all in, like we're not at that point. But sure. It seems like they want to make a ton of moves in 2027, and they've got a bunch of capital for that, which is why they would have the ability to afford Jonathan Grenard. But some of the moves that they have to make are stuff like extending Jordan Addison, right? Especially now that they didn't grab a receiver in this draft, which not a mistake, but context. And there's like other moves that they're probably going to want to make, including people on their own roster. So there's a trade-off here, will they have the ability to do X, Y, or Z thing in free agency, like grab a starting center, right? And there will be a point in that cycle where the difference between the player they want to get and the player they would not have been able to get is the size of Jonathan Grenard's contract. Maybe not in 2027 because first-year cap hits are always fairly low, but in 28, 29, 30, right? So that's what is being traded. That's what the Eagles are acquiring. They're not getting that much additional value over the third-round picks that they traded away because they no longer have access to that cap space and can't acquire players. So it's not like you're trading a player of Jonathan Grenard's talent for 2/3. You're trading the contract that is going to consume a lot of cap space. Now, I do think Jonathan Grenard is worth 4 years, $100 million. Absolutely. Easily, even. So I think that you are generating value against that contract, which is helpful for the Eagles, but there's still an opportunity cost, and that's why it was 2/3. Would I have preferred a second? Yeah. Is the difference between the second you would have gotten from the Eagles and the 2/3 that you got really significant? Kinda. That's fair. But I get it, and it's not the worst thing in the world. I just wish there was a better plan for your backup edge rusher. Or even, like, I'm not that confident in Dallas Turner, right? I thought he had a good year last year, even before, like, the midway point of the season when he turned it around statistically. I thought it was pretty good. It's not enough for me to be like, well, don't got to worry about Jonathan Grenard. You got Dallas Turner. Like, I'm not there. And I would like more assurance that there's going to be a lot of competition there. Because right now, it's like Tyler Batty and Bo Richter and just like a bunch of edge rushers that just are not guys that have a lot of high level prospects. Like it's those two, and that is the concern. So,
yeah, the Vikings were not going to be able to pay that. There was no desire. Let's go to the mailbag. It's not a long mailbag, but it is an important one. Skimble Shanks, the Railway Cat, asks, for Arif's Healthcare Administration Corner, is it a good use of medical resources to have the best doctors in the world working for a football team?
Yeah, I mean, other than that, I think that we do a pretty good job of efficiently allocating resources, right? In society at large. Like, these guys are the most skilled until we put them in the most societally advantageous position. Normally, that's what happens all the time. So it is strange that the best doctors in the world are working for a football team. Really, really unique experience where, like, our top coders and programmers are working to benefit humanity instead of working for, like, billionaire slop.
Is this the sort of thing where, like, they were NASA scientists but then decided to make mattresses?
I always love those stories because it's like, hey, that doesn't feel good. Like, I'm glad the mattresses seem fine. Which, oh my God, I was having a conversation with someone like the other day about how crooked the mattress review industry is, which, if you know what I'm talking about, that huge deal. If you don't know what I'm talking about, that's a rabbit hole I'm not going to get into now, but, like, mattresses are screwed up. That's my take.
I'm going to have to do a deep dive after the show. Thanks.
Yeah.
Raul asks, which first-round reach do you prefer? Last year's solid guy in Donovan Jackson, or this year's boomer bust guy in Caleb Banks?
It depends on where you are in your roster, I suppose, right? Because, like, if you're bad, you want the boomer bust guy. And the Vikings are bad, but that doesn't feel like my correct answer. I think my head says Caleb Banks and my heart says Donovan Jackson, who I want to say, like, we don't know if he's good yet. We just know he's not, like, kind of bad. Which is much better than where the Vikings have historically been with draft picks for that position, don't get me wrong. But, like, with a first-round pick, you are allowed to want more than that.
Next question is from the Johnny Munt Apologist.
That's a good name.
Never have to apologize for anything involving Johnny Munt, unless you're asking for less. The run game has been revamped in the offseason before, just be middle of the road. A pivot towards heavy personnel with Frank Smith and a new fullback are going to make this run game, are they going to make it competitive? Tiernan Rouse as a sixth offensive lineman in packages. Do we need a Dolphin-esque running back to make that work?
Well, they got one.
The way that it was written kind of made it sound like they were looking for, like, the dolphin / human from the episode of South Park.
Oh,
Like,
I was thinking the dolphin that Aaron Rodgers was listening to.
oh, that too. Yeah, actually, let's combine the two. That's
Unholy combination.
yeah. Yes.
Um,
We need a hybrid dolphin.
okay, so the reason that the Dolphins specifically come up is Frank Smith. He was an offensive coordinator for the Dolphins, and he's now with the Vikings. Um, what's really interesting right now is that all of these teams that do this wide zone stuff, right? That are like, we got to get these smaller, more athletic offensive linemen, unless it's like Tristan Wirfs, who's just athletic no matter the size. But like primarily, we got to get these athletic offensive linemen, which means we got to like move down in terms of the size charting that we're using, so that we can get to the sideline, and like all of that has radically shifted. And a bunch of these wide zone teams have been getting bigger along the offensive line. Now, some of these teams are changing their scheme, right? Like the current Dolphins, having rooted out their old coaching staff, are getting huge at offensive line. But like that is a Packers group, right? That's John Eric Sullivan, former Packers assistant front office guy, and Jeff Halfley, who was just with the Packers as a defensive coordinator, but still. And they do a bunch of zone. They do a bunch of wide zone. They've gotten a lot of athletic offensive linemen over the years, but a lot of these teams are getting bigger instead of faster along the offensive line. And I think it's because they've been getting beat up by like Aaron Donald and Kobe Turner and Jared Verse and whatever, right? And also non-Rams players on the defensive line, like your Chris Joneses and stuff. Like it seems very much like, for example, the Vikings have been traumatized by Dexter Lawrence, which I am extremely sympathetic to. Like, yeah, okay, fair enough. But like, because of that, like we're getting these bigger offensive linemen, which means we're not necessarily going to be implementing some of the stuff that a lot of these run game coordinators have become known for, because they themselves don't necessarily want to implement them. It does also mean that it's going to change the way the athletic modeling works. I don't know. But yeah, I think that the Vikings have been changing their scheme over the years under Kevin O'Connell. Initially, it was very much in outside zone. I should say wide zone, because Kevin O'Connell made a very specific distinction between wide zone and outside zone. A wide zone team, and have been playing a lot more duo, which a lot of people yell about and talk about, and a little bit of power / gap. So yeah, they're already doing it, and getting somebody like a Bredesen, getting kind of a little bit bigger along the offensive line, kind of just more broadly or generally, kind of lets you be a little bit more multiple, so long as you're maintaining a base level of athleticism.
Wes asks, of the newly acquired rookies, who has the most realistic shot at a starting role this season?
Besides Caleb Banks, like I feel like that's the. Yep. They lost a bunch of defensive tackles and drafted one in the first round. I'd say Jacoby Thomas. Like if we're not picking the obvious ones, right? Like Dominique Orange is going to play 500-ish snaps at nose tackle. He's probably immediately going to replace Levi Drake Rodriguez, right? That's usually not a starting role. It'll come with some starts, right? Jake Golday does have a path, right? Because Eric Wilson, as well as he played last year, does not have a lock on the job. But like there are no safeties. So I think it's Jacoby Thomas if it's not Caleb Banks. And I think that that's probably the pathway that we'll talk about the most.
Will Melvin asks, besides Fabian Moreau, who are some Vikings players who, quote, won in this year's draft?
I guess Aaron Jones, right? Because like Damon Claiborne is not taking that guy's job. And he got a fullback, so that's pretty helpful. I'd say Eric Wilson, right? Because his job was not certain, and I don't think Jake Golday can start right away necessarily. So that helped. Obviously all the cornerbacks, like you mentioned. Jay Ward, right? Because again, I'm not as confident about Jacoby Thomas in coverage. Because Jay Ward has got like a couple of shots here. And the Vikings didn't grab a receiver. So like Ty Felton. Come on down, man. Good job.
Next up is a question from Big Elgin, who asks, what are the most likely remaining veteran free agents the Vikings might target to fill the roster? Would each be starters or depth players with the current lineup?
Let's see. If the free agency tracker over the cap is updated, like hopefully that'll help. I do think they need a receiver. Technically, Stephon Diggs is available. which is funny. He does have a charge he's got to beat first, so we'll see how that one goes. And also a relationship to mismanage. So pending that, you might be able to bring him in. Otherwise, you could also have other old and washed up receivers like Tyreek Hill or Deebo Samuel. Tyreek Hill probably still has some speed, a lot of speed. Deebo might be like cooked forever, despite being younger, because of all the hits that he took and all the injuries that he had. In the non-objectionable receiver division, Deebo's done nothing wrong, but he's just like not that good, right? You probably like Curtis Samuel, who's also like 30, but not nearly as broken, but also not as high level talented. I guess my favorite receiver is Juwan Jennings, who just like does stuff. I don't know how else to describe him. Do you need a job done? He will do it. That's the kind of receiver he is. I love him. I think he's a great receiver, and I don't really know like what the deal is with him. The last time I mentioned him, someone responded with like, "Oh, actually, the reason Juwan Jennings hasn't signed is like this really important reason," and I don't remember it. So for right now, he's clean, and you don't got to worry about that. And sign him. I think he's still got. Let's see, San Francisco 49ers insulted Juwan Jennings with the way they were playing. I don't really care about that. Okay, yeah, cool. Let's get him. That's my guy. Unless I learned something about him that I forgot, then he's not my guy. Other than that, I don't know that there's any centers, right? If you take a look at the over the cap, like free agents available, the top center is Ryan Kelly. I'm telling you, that's probably not happening. Andre James is available. He was an injured receiver or center for the Chargers. He's played for the Chargers. Of course, he was injured. Eternal meme Will Clapp is available. He's a little bit older now, so Liam Eichenberg is really bad, so he's available. I don't know. Like a lot of these guys are probably better than Blake Brandel, which is probably why they didn't feel as motivated as I would have to grab a center in the draft. I mean, they technically grabbed a center, but like, let's be real. So I guess Ethan Posick is probably the guy. And it would be funny to get the tallest center for Kyler Murray. Let's see, probably edge defenders. Are there any of those? Bryce Huff. That's actually kind of Bryce Huff. Look at him. You're probably not getting Joey Bosa because he's hurt and I think he's done. Hassan Reddick has been having a weird whatever. Von Miller's probably done. Cameron Jordan's probably retired. I haven't looked that up, but it wouldn't surprise me. AJ Epenesa's not that good. I'd go after Bryce Huff. He had a good year 2 years ago. Maybe that'll happen again. And there you go.
Elon Munch asks, after not drafting edge after trading away Grenard, who are the top free agents to consider for a backup edge rusher this season?
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Kyle Van Noy, too. He's 35, but like since when has that stopped the Vikings?
Yeah, exactly. We practically had a player coach out there. Zen Cupid asks, are there any remaining Cam Akers related draft picks out there? If so, how do the Vikings obtain that pick? If not, is Cam available for a future seventh somehow? This trade, this particular pick has gone all over the country and has somehow remained all about the running back.
Yeah, like a very like Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants pick, right? Okay, I haven't read the book, but
just if we're going by the title,
right?
Then yes, this is
my understanding of the book and/or book series. That's got to be it feels like a series.
Is this like anime where you pretend not to have watched it?
No, I genuinely haven't. I have no idea what's going on. I remember the title, and I'm like, oh. Certainly the pants travel with the sisters in the sisterhood, right? Like that. That's okay. Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants.
Just ask Sumer Brain real quick for a summary.
Oh, yeah, I do have Sumer Brain up for a different question. Hold on. What is the series? It's a Netflix series too. Okay, Sisterhood. It's probably the movie of the Traveling Pants about, and why are the pants so prominent? Like it's in the title and in the movie poster. All right. But to be clear, I'm asking the goth Sumer Brain, which we typically only ask football questions to. Okay, The Sister of the Traveling Pants is a novel turned into a series of movies, focusing on four teenage girls who form unbreakable bonds over a pair of jeans they share during their summer apart. The pants symbolize their friendship and serve as a reminder of their connection whenever life takes them away from each other. Okay, yeah, I nailed the analogy. Great. So the pick that the Vikings traded to the Texans for Cam Akers was sent to them. So it's pick number 198 in October of 2024. The Texans then sent the pick back to the Vikings to acquire Ed Ingram. The Vikings, that was the full trade. It was like a 6-round pick for Ed Ingram. The Vikings then packaged that pick in their trade for running back Jordan Mason. So the Vikings received a 6th-round pick and traded away that pick and a 5th. Then the 49ers send that pick, the Cam Akers pick number 198 in 2026, to the Patriots in a trade for defensive lineman Keon White. At the time of the pick, the Patriots then traded it to the Vikings in exchange for number 234 and a 2027 6th-round pick. The Vikings then used that to draft running back DeMond Claiborne. So 3 running backs, Cam Akers, Jordan Mason, DeMond Claiborne, all acquired with this pick. Incredible. I love how it kept on returning home and it kept on reestablishing its true meaning, running the ball. But I believe that's it for I believe the Pants are done traveling.
Yeah, let's just be done. Arif's Tormentor asks, what is the 2026 war impact of trading Grenard for 1 3rd-round pick that contributes to the current roster? Obviously, next year's pick and cap savings are a major part of the full value, but I would like to know what this means for the guys currently in the building for the next season, which may be their last.
So it's like a pretty difficult thing to estimate because you have to estimate the impact of like cap space for wins above replacement. But if you take a look at like the over the cap valuation, right? So we can get a decent understanding of like value over the average per year. Because of his really limited sack production, I think this is a little bit broken for him, and it doesn't really capture him because at $19 million a year, remember he just signed a $25 million a year contract. At $19 million a year, he produced negative $13 million. I don't think that's who he is, and I believe that this is only using traditional box score statistics, even though it says it's in partnership with PFF, because I think it hasn't really been updated in a little bit. I would say that he is producing at about a $26-7 million level in terms of wins above replacement. So if you free up $19 million in cap space and you are going to pay him 25, right? Let's say it's 25, right? So you're evaluating like $25 million in like 27, 28, 29, 30, right? Whatever that's worth. You have, and maybe he's producing like a little bit more than that, so 26 million. So now you have a deficit of 1 million a year to make up. That if you're perfectly efficient in free agency, you're acquiring a guy worth 25 million who's going to give you that in wins above replacement. You would need to have your 3rd-round picks be worth at least $1 million a year above their contract value, which is admittedly not that much. Which means basically you just need a rotational player. So in a world where he's been correctly valued by the Eagles, getting a rotational player and making sure you sign someone in free agency worth that much would be a net neutral wins above replacement thing. So I don't know. I can't tell you he was worth 1 win or 0.38 wins or whatever. My understanding is that probably because he's an edge rusher, not a quarterback, the most he'd be worth per season is like 0.3 wins per season, which sounds so low, but that's just like what the math works out to be because there are so many players that contribute to winning.
Alex asks, how good does a non-starting linebacker have to be to make him as valuable as Emmanuel McNeil Warren is going to be?
Well, we don't know that Jake Goldday is not going to start eventually, but like safeties are already more valuable than linebackers, not according to the NFL, but still, I would say that they are more valuable than linebackers. So like insanely good, I guess. This assumes that Emmanuel McNeil Warren was incorrectly valued by the NFL, which we don't know that for a fact. It might not be the case, but the consensus board would suggest that maybe he is. So the evidence we have suggests that when the NFL steals a player, when someone falls down the board relative to the consensus board, that player is going to perform better than the average pick at that position but not by nearly as much as the consensus board thought. So the NFL is going to be closer to correctly valuing them, but that guy is going to be better than average for that pick. He's probably going to overperform his draft position, so he would be a steal just by not by as much. So probably Emmanuel McNeil-Warren is going to outplay Jake Golday, in my opinion.
Next up, absolutely not Arif Hassan NFL. Many people are saying that Arif doesn't know what consensus is. What would he say to those people? And what year did he expect to be called out specifically by an organization, potentially the 49ers?
Okay, so the thing is, I didn't ever expect, because like teams use consensus boards, and I don't mean like internal consensus boards where they come to a consensus and that's what their board is. That's different. That's a team board. That's different. I mean, they use an aggregation of media big boards to help determine where players might fall in the draft so they can correctly value and manipulate the market to their capability to get the guys that they want. I already mentioned this process. So I didn't expect ever for a team to be upset at the concept, especially not an analytics forward team, ostensibly like the 49ers should be, which, Kwesi, I hope you're having a good time there. That is crazy. As for like not knowing what the word consensus means, I will say that very few people have called me out for that specific semantic misstep, which I will admit, you are correct. Consensus is probably the wrong word to use here. I used to use a bunch of different words. I used aggregate. I used composite a lot. And consensus is the one that caught on. Like that's it. It is not the correct usage because consensus kind of implies relatively universal agreement, which is not what the board does. It aggregates all of this stuff together and puts it together, which is why composite would be more accurate. But as I always kind of say about language, if it conveys its meaning, it's not really the wrong usage of the word all that much.
I hate you so much.
What?
That's not how language works.
That is exactly how language works. I'm not backing down on this one. Language is a descriptive model of communication. If you communicate what you mean effectively, you have used language effectively. Does it bother some people? Yeah, of course. But like, I am not going to get owned by a podium lectern guy. F that guy. I'm right.
Okay. But like, God, this feels just like the Vinatieri Hall of Fame question.
Okay, I'll say this. That doesn't mean I don't get annoyed at some stuff. Like, I still don't like the usage of the word literally, right? We both agree on that. I'm confident in that, right?
Sure do.
That doesn't mean it's wrong. That means I dislike it. And point of fact, I'm right to dislike it. It shouldn't be used that way, but it is used that way, which means that is unfortunately the definition, because definitions just tell us what the meaning of a word is, and the meaning of the word is what people understand the word to mean when people use it. So that sucks. I wish people wouldn't use it that way, and it does degrade from the application of use that is useful for it, which is to mean a thing actually happened. Well, the original meaning of literally didn't even mean that, so it has moved a lot since then. But I will say I did prefer the meaning that it was not figurative, that it is not an exclamation or an emphasis word, which is what it is used as now, but rather a clear descriptor of factual events in a non-exaggerated way. I thought it had a lot of use as that, and now it doesn't have use as that. So that doesn't mean you can't be bothered by language, but that is how words work.
Pacifically, yes, that is exactly how words work. Let's go to Damian Bolsharif, who asks, for Arif's consensus big board corner, the CBBC, have you tracked draft performance based on consensus value in terms of team wins the following season? Is there any correlation between over-under performing at a draft with the number of wins-losses a team has the following season? Or, given picks in a draft may not have immediate impact, are there any trends which could be extrapolated in seasons 2 to 4 post-draft?
I've not done it for wins. I've only done it for player performance outcomes. And it does a pretty good job with player performance outcomes. I will say that I don't think the wins will tell us much, and this is just me shooting from the hip, because I think it's just going to wash out. because the 49ers don't draft well and have won recently by the consensus board. And also in real life, those players aren't on the roster. And the Eagles draft remarkably well, and despite themselves have won a lot of games. Like, despite their best efforts, have won so many games over the past couple of years. So I would say it is likely that there's a slight positive signal to wins, but I also wouldn't use it that way because, like it says in the question, those players aren't contributing, generally speaking, immediately. Like, Nolan Smith was seen as a positive pick by the consensus board, and he didn't contribute until like year 3 or whatever. So, and Milton Williams, I believe, was a positive pick by the consensus board, and he didn't contribute until year 4. But yeah, I haven't, and that's not really on my agenda anytime soon.
All right, we're going to go off the rails here, starting with Anya Taylor-Joy, who asks, for Arif's Body Positivity Corner, Luke Braun stated on today's Locked On Vikings episode that he thinks secret agent Caleb Banks needs to lose weight. Can we cancel him for being fat-phobic?
I'm generally in favor of canceling Luke Braun for any number of reasons, as bad faith as they may be. I'm sure I have a line somewhere about the things that you can or can't cancel him for, but this is nowhere near the line. We should absolutely cancel him for being fat-phobic. That said, I will say that I think secret agent Caleb Banks could make sure that his athleticism is well preserved and that he's got the ability to shoot gaps pretty well. And however he needs to organize his body type to his own preference as much as he wants, that's probably smart.
Ice Delonda Est asks, question for Arif's feet and running corner. Why is Naruto running effective to get past the security checkpoint at a hotel, but not an offensive line?
Okay, well, first, okay, there's a couple of things here. An incident occurred at a hotel that made the news, and the video camera footage showed somebody getting past security running, which that's hilarious that worked. Like, you've got to be kidding me. Running worked. But I think he wasn't Naruto running. I just want to be that clear. I think it was a combination of him leaning while he was running, which when I briefly Googled it because of the Area 51 thing, if you remember, Naruto running evidently is when you're not swinging your arms, but you've got your arms swung back behind you in kind of a nearly fixed state. So they're like a fixed wing jet or whatever. And your hands are just kind of flailing behind you and they're not swinging forward or anything like that. And you're leaning forward. And I guess they do that in this show because they're like ninjas. And I don't know. Not actually a very efficient way to run. Shocker. Otherwise, the fastest athletes in the world would do it, but they don't. I just want to put that out there. But I think he was leaning forward, but his arms weren't doing the thing. But like the nature of the security camera, which has this like fisheye effect of its lens, like it's got like a 0.6 zoom for some reason, made it look like that. So I don't think that happened. I will also say that probably the reason it doesn't work for getting past an offensive line is because I feel like offensive linemen are way more motivated to stop bad actors than whoever's getting paid near minimum wage to work at a hotel for an event for rich people. That's all I'll say.
Next up, question for Arif's firings corner. As a journalist, which journalist firing for being inappropriate with a subject is funnier? Diana Rossini or Billy Bush? And as a business, same question.
As a business.
Addendum. As owner and CEO of Wide Left, which of your employees or contractors is most likely to be fired for being inappropriate with a subject?
That's got to be Kevin. That easily. Let's see. Which one's funnier? I mean, I have to go with Diana Rossini, right? Because Billy Bush being in the same bus with Trump when he said the thing, for people who don't know, grab him by the whatever, right? That like betrays like a serious, like he didn't push back and he kind of laughed. That betrays like a serious, like greater concern about the things that we find acceptable. Diana Rossini canoodling with a coach, like that's like a serious breach of journalistic ethics and forces us to like question kind of her role in media and the credibility of her reports. But at the end of the day, it is like sports journalism, right? And sometimes I do sports journalism that I do think is important, but like primarily it's not. And also like the breaking news type of sports journalism is generally definitely not. So like there's like a cap on how serious it can be. And, we're there. She hit the cap. It's not that serious. It's very funny. She was correct to resign, in my opinion. But like also, hey man, I hope the husband takes, like, unless there's something seriously wrong with the relationship, we don't know what's going on in her relationship with her husband. So there could be a million things that would change the context of this. But barring that, man, I hope he takes you to town. You've been treating him so bad publicly for years. Years! Why are you saying all this stuff about your husband? That's crazy. Unless he sucks, in which case I take it back.
All of the tweets, all of the interviews that have come up that have been like, oh my God, I can't believe that, in the context of what was happening.
Yeah.
I gotta say, I was loving it. I was enjoying it as a distraction from the draft week. Like just the fact that all of this was coming out like right as the draft was building up, it was so perfect. Whether it was the video where the two of them were talking about his wife on camera, whether it was Twitter trying to figure out the math on how old one of her children is, and like the math as to they were in the same place, and then 9 months later the kid was born, like trying to figure all that out. Yeah. Like there's
I will say the thing about the kid being named Michael, she does have a brother named Michael. That is an important piece of context, but it doesn't feel good. Right? And I do feel genuinely bad for the kid because I'm betting he is going to wonder for a long time who he's named after, which like sucks.
Yeah.
Like, that's gotta suck. But also, like, why are you tweeting about it, Diana? That's crazy.
The fact that, God, and also the fact that The Athletic was like so very gung ho about this is exonerated, whatever, and like, no, that's not how any of this worked. And the smartest thing I read about this whole thing was on Reddit about like a Bill Simmons subreddit comment. It was like, there's 6 people that were on that were also a part of this, and none of them are corroborating it. None of them. No one is willing to like say, yeah, that this is exactly what has been going on. Their fingers interlocking there was just coincidence. No. You got what you got.
Yeah, you got what you got.
This is what you get for hugging Italians. As we covered last episode.
We are not Italophobic on this podcast. Come on, that's what you get for hugging Italians.
I think that was almost the name of it.
That was the take.
Yeah, that was the take.
I will. That was the take. I will say that, but like, that's not the official stance. Is what I'm saying.
No. Luke Braun is also asking a question. After her brief stint at Pro Football Network, will you be subscribing to the Diana Rossini politically slanted Substack?
I got canceled Substack. The canceled tour. No, I don't. Probably not.
Room Temperature asks, who is buying Norse code from a shady bankruptcy and running a Vikings parody account using the name? The same guy who used to do Purple Code.
Oh my God. Whoa. That's a throwback. Man. I cannot believe the Onion tried to do it and they were stopped by a judge. So I guess they did a bunch of stuff. There's a Pablo Torre podcast episode that breaks like it all down, evidently. I clearly haven't had time to listen to it yet.
It's amazing.
Fantastic.
It is phenomenal. They kept working at it for 18 months until it happened. And now Alex Jones is tweeting out about Tim and Eric, which, while I despise, he is treating Tim and Eric as a documentary, and I have to appreciate that.
It does like firmly establish him as a bit, which was his argument, to be clear, that he was doing a bit the whole time. And now he is forced into a prison of doing his own bit, which I would have so much sympathy for, like you wouldn't believe. But he sucks, so I don't care.
No. him being on a broadcast screaming, just because you're wearing my shirt doesn't make you me, while he is shirtless. Some people's kids. I swear to God.
Yeah.
I apparently missed one. The Village Yakmonger asks, who would Goth Sumerbrain have drafted?
So we asked, that's why I had it up. We asked Goth Sumerbrain, who should the Vikings have drafted in the 2026 NFL draft? I added no further clarifying questions. I thought that was enough context. Sumerbrain, very up to date, right? Like to football AI, it's going to tell you everything you need to know. I think they could have benefited from drafting a solid wide receiver, all right, to support their quarterback. Oh, great take. Someone like Jordan Addison would have been a great pick. What do you think?
Perfect. No notes.
No notes.
Let's run it back. Let's draft him again.
You just got to draft him again, man. He can't say no. He's not allowed by law. He can't say no.
I kept seeing this screenshot that caused me to go down a rabbit hole of people using the quote McDonald's AI to like learn code.
Oh, the Chipotle AI.
Yeah, so it's like, but like they were using it as McDonald's. Turns out McDonald's, that was a Photoshop thing. McDonald's doesn't have an AI thing, but it did cause me to go down the rabbit hole of using company AI in order to like get trick it basically. And yeah, using that for Chipotle, people, and then specifically Rufus from Amazon, which but like people using Rufus in order to like solve complex math problems and like trying to get it to like determine which like to find out the history of the Kardashian sisters and all that. Like, my beautiful. That's absolutely wonderful. I love that. Let's hijack everyone's AI to be useless. Kyle Segal asks, I've realized that your decision to end Norse code is really just a cry for help. A statement that your loyal listenership has not given you enough. And I respect this. Therefore, I propose the following 3 bargains to you in exchange for you not ending Norse code. Number 1, obviously we would never frame Luke Braun for robbing a bank, as that would be illegal. But perhaps my next heist involves a certain mask covering my face. Read between the lines here.
Right.
Number 2, we kidnap Eric Thompson, dress him entirely in Iowa Panthers football gear, and duct tape him to a chair while forcing him to watch the 2022 South Dakota State Championship game until he loses his mind, Clockwork Orange style.
Okay, that is one potential bargain to take.
Number 3, we hunt down and destroy Don from Ohio once and for all. He's less of a person and more of an idea. What say you?
Okay, so here's the thing. I don't control whether or not Norse code is going to continue. But it could only help. So why don't you do all 3 of those things and see... Also, I just want to clarify. It's Northern Iowa Panthers. Come on.
Get your details right.
Yeah. But you should see if that'll help. If you do all 3 of those things, that can only improve the odds that Norse code remains alive. So I can't make any promises, but like I can suggest that would help.
Yeah. Mad Max Brosmer asks, for Arif's legal advice corner, I was on Reddit today and I learned that using seed oils in the home-cooked meals I make for my kids is equivalent to murder due to long-term negative health effects that are caused by it. Mm-hmm. Given this, I will obviously be turning myself into the police. My question is, do I need to lawyer up before turning myself in? Or can I trust that the police will treat me fairly and respect all of my constitutional rights?
Why wouldn't they? That's their job, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Protect, serve, and acquire Hyundais.
Right. Yeah, of course. That's part of the deal. It's on the badge. Yeah, so seed oils. I'm just not going to get into that one, I guess. They're fine, but also it is the case that oils with omega-3 fatty acids are generally better, but there's always a limit to that. We generally don't eat or consume enough omega-3s, so you should find ways to preference them, but don't go overboard. But seed oils are like fine. Don't worry about it. It's chill.
Finally, from I Hate Carmel, Indiana, for James's Hater Corner, Moulin Rouge is coming to the end of its run on Broadway and is doing what any show on its last leg does: stunt casting. What other targets of James's hatred would be improved by including Wayne Brady, Bob the Drag Queen, or Megan Thee Stallion for a limited engagement? The Packers offensive line for one.
That actually, yeah. Remember when I tweeted out like the picture of the Packers offensive line and their hair gradually moved from the top of their head to the bottom from like left to right? That rule. That is my favorite. My favorite thing about the Packers offensive line, which admittedly low bar, don't like them, but that was awesome. Yeah, what other targets of James's hatred would be improved by including? Well, do we get to say your ex? Is that?
No, I sure, but I'm not entirely sure that would. I mean, Wayne Brady being around would like improve. I would feel bad for Wayne Brady.
That's a good point. We don't want to do that to him.
No. Other than his training day thing on Chappelle's show, he seems like a decent enough fellow.
Yeah, right. What a nice young man.
Run! And that will be the end of this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys have all enjoyed it. We will be back soon. This is the off season, and now that the draft is done, we've got all sorts of nothing to talk about for a little while, but talk about nothing we shall soon. Arif, what do you have to plug?
It's a little thing called a consensus board.
Is that something people are talking about? Lots of people are saying this.
Many people. So we've got the consensus board, obviously the aggregated data of 130 plus draft analysts who, in that aggregation, have produced a player ranking, and that player ranking could be used for various things like figuring out, who's the most polarizing player in the draft, or whether or not the guy that you got has a wide range of rankings or is generally considered to be a value pick at the pick that your team grabbed them. Great. That's good stuff. We've got grades coming out, or we have grades that came out for that, which is awesome. We're also doing a pretty big deep dive on the Caleb Banks stuff because it is a super interesting thing. Again, Matt has finished his portion. It is really just up to me to do that. I will say I have been a little bit busy, so I haven't gotten around to all of it. I've produced about basically half the data I need to finish writing out that piece. But yeah, I think one of the more intriguing picks of the draft, which I would not have thought heading into the draft would be the case. Truly, I think a boom bust prospect, which is not easily captured by the polarity ranking, the polarization score that you would have expected, but that's coming up soon. Matt's going to continue writing about all these draft prospects. He actually also finished his Kyler Murray film review, and I was like, okay, you finished this right before the draft. We're going to hold it for after the draft. So we've got that coming up soon too as well. So we got all kinds of content over at Wide Left Out Football. Check it out. I had a bunch of free trials sign up, and I know a bunch of them are going to cancel. But if you signed up for a free trial once, you can't do it again. So now you got to pay me. That's great. Head over to Wide Left Out Football.
Your article is not done yet. Like your side of things and the stats aren't done because it does take a significant amount of time for Sumer Brain to give the answer after you type it in. It takes a lot longer than most generative AI models.
No, it does. So. It does take a while, and then it spits out the article that I'm going to write word for word, without modification and without any ethical objections from anybody. So
nope, and you charge for that. It's great.
Yeah.
So that is the end of this episode of Norse Code. Hope you have enjoyed it. We will be back soon. So for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. And just remember, ethics don't count. And we'll be back soon.
Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, and wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan of... and he can be found on Twitter at ArifHassanNFL. I'm your producer and host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN or at my personal account at BigMono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can do so in a couple of different ways. You can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there. For $3.50 a month, you get bonus material and more. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode for a one-time donation, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and pick up some Norse Code merch. Any questions or comments that cannot fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this.
Hey, all things are possible through the power of Ben DiNucci.